My in-laws' house was where I went with my 5-year-old son. Then a neighbor came out and said, "No one has lived here for a long time." I immediately called my wife. "Did your parents move?" She replied, "No, they are in the same house as before." "What are you talking about?" I was confused and couldn't understand. Then my son said, "Daddy, look over there." And I trembled with fear. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. My name is Keith Hill, and until 3 months ago, I believed I had everything a man could want. A successful construction business that I'd built from nothing, a beautiful wife named Harmony, and our 5-year-old son, Tyler. We lived in a pristine suburban neighborhood where everyone knew each other's business, or at least thought they did. I'd met Harmony Porter 7 years ago at a charity auction. She was volunteering, radiant in a simple blue dress that complemented her auburn hair. I was there because my business partner Jared Rogers had dragged me along, insisting I needed to network with the upper class. Harmony wasn't upper class. She worked as a dental hygienist, but she had this grace about her that made every other woman in the room fade into the background. Our courtship was swift. Within 6 months, I'd proposed. Within a year, we were married. Tyler came along 2 years later, a perfect blend of both our features, but with my stubborn streak and her infectious laugh. At least, that's what I used to think. The construction business had been my life's work. Starting with nothing but a pickup truck and determination, I'd built Hill Construction into one of the most respected firms in the county. We specialized in custom homes for wealthy clients, and my reputation for quality and reliability had made me wealthy enough to provide Harmony with everything she wanted. She'd never had to work after Tyler was born. "I want to be there for him," she'd said, and I supported that completely. A child should have his mother present, especially in those crucial early years. I worked long hours to ensure she could have that luxury. Harmony's parents, Robert and Margaret Porter, lived about 40 minutes away in an older part of town. They were simple people. He was a retired postal worker. She'd been a secretary at the local high school. They adored Tyler and always welcomed our visits with homemade cookies and stories about Harmony's childhood. At least, that's what I thought until last weekend. The discovery started innocently enough. Harmony had been visiting her parents every Sunday for the past month, taking Tyler with her. "They're getting older, Keith," she'd explained. "I want Tyler to have memories with his grandparents." I've been working on a particularly demanding project, a mansion for Julian Douglas, a tech entrepreneur who'd moved to our area. So I've been grateful for the quiet Sundays to catch up on paperwork. Last Sunday, however, the Douglas project had wrapped up early. I decided to surprise Harmony and Tyler by joining them at the Porter's house. Maybe we could all have dinner together, I thought. I could pick up some steaks on the way and grill them in their backyard like old times. I drove through the familiar neighborhoods, past the strip mall where Harmony and I had shared our first date at a little Italian restaurant that had since closed down. The Porters lived in Maplewood Estates, a neighborhood that had seen better days, but maintained a certain dignity with its tree-lined streets and well-kept lawns. When I pulled into the Porters' driveway, something felt off immediately. The house looked empty, not just quiet, but genuinely vacant. The lawn was overgrown, newspapers were piled up by the front door, and there was a for sale sign in the yard that looked weathered, like it had been there for months. Tyler wasn't in the backyard where he usually played. Harmony's car was nowhere to be seen. Confused, I walked up to the front door and knocked. No answer. I peered through the windows and saw furniture covered in sheets, the kind of setup you see in houses that have been abandoned. That's when Mrs. Hendricks emerged from the house next door. She was an elderly woman who'd lived there for decades, always friendly during our previous visits. "Excuse me," I called out to her. "Do you know where the Porters went?" She looked at me with genuine surprise. "The Porters? Honey, no one has lived in that house for a long time. They moved out about 4 months ago. Something about needing to be closer to Robert's medical specialists in Arizona. Didn't they tell you? 4 months ago." That was right around the time Harmony had started her regular Sunday visits to see them. My head spun as I tried to process this information. I pulled out my phone with shaking fingers and called Harmony. "Hey, baby," she answered cheerfully. "What's up?" Tyler and I are just finishing lunch with Mom and Dad. Did your parents move? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. What? No, they're in the same house as before. What are you talking about? Are you feeling okay? I looked around the deserted property, then at Mrs. Hendricks, who was watching me with growing concern. I'm at their house right now, Harmony. It's empty. There's a for sale sign. The neighbor says they moved to Arizona 4 months ago. There was a long pause. Too long. Keith, you must be at the wrong address. We're here right now. Tyler, say hi to Daddy. I heard Tyler's voice in the background, but it sounded distant, muffled. Harmony, I'm standing in their driveway. I'm looking at the house where we've had Christmas dinner for the past 5 years. Where exactly are you? Another pause. You know what? Tyler just spilled juice all over himself. I need to clean him up. We'll talk when I get home. Okay? Love you. She hung up. I stood there for a moment, staring at my phone, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Mrs. Hendricks approached me cautiously. Are you all right, dear? You look like you've seen a ghost. Before I could answer, a small voice called out from behind me. Daddy, Daddy, look over there. I spun around and saw Tyler running toward me from the direction of the street. But that was impossible. I just heard him in the background of Harmony's call, supposedly inside his grandparents' house. Tyler, how did you get here? He pointed excitedly toward a car parked 3 houses down, a silver sedan I didn't recognize. Mommy's in that car, with Uncle Simon. They told me to wait in the car while they looked at houses, but I saw your truck and wanted to say hi. Uncle Simon. I'd never heard Harmony mention any Uncle Simon. As I looked toward the silver sedan, I saw movement in the front seat. 2 figures sitting very close together. Too close. Even from this distance, I could see the woman's auburn hair, unmistakably Harmony's. The man next to her had his arm around her, and they were kissing. I trembled with fear, but not the kind Tyler might inspire by jumping out from behind a tree. This was the fear that comes when your entire world starts crumbling beneath your feet, when you realize that everything you believed about your life might be a carefully constructed lie. Tyler, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, go wait by Daddy's truck for a minute. He skipped away happily, oblivious to the fact that he'd just destroyed our family with a few innocent words. I stood there watching my wife of 6 years embrace another man in broad daylight, 3 houses away from where she claimed to be visiting her parents who hadn't lived there in months. The methodical mind that had built my business from nothing began clicking into gear, analyzing the situation with cold precision. Harmony wasn't just cheating. She constructed an elaborate lie that involved our son, her parents' relocation, and God knows what else. The Sunday visits, the phone calls, the stories about Tyler playing with his grandparents. All of it was fiction designed to give her time with this Simon. As I watched them together, something inside me shifted. The loving husband, the trusting partner, the man who believed in the sanctity of our marriage. That man died right there on the sidewalk of Maplewood Estates. What replaced him was something harder, colder. Something that remembered every business rival who'd tried to cheat me. Every contractor who'd attempted to cut corners on my projects. Every person who'd ever mistaken my fairness for weakness. They'd all learned that Keith Hill was not a man to be crossed. Now it was time for my wife and her Uncle Simon to learn the same lesson. Chapter 2. The investigation begins. I drove home in silence, Tyler chattering happily in the back seat about how he'd had fun looking at houses with Mommy and Uncle Simon. Every innocent word from my son was another nail in the coffin of my marriage, but I kept my voice steady as I asked casual questions. Uncle Simon seems nice. How long have you known him? A long time. He gives me candy and lets me play games on his phone. Mommy says he's a very special friend. A special friend. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. What kind of houses were you looking at? Pretty ones. Uncle Simon says maybe we'll all live together someday, like a big family. The rage that coursed through me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not only was Harmony cheating, but she was involving our son in her fantasies of a future with this man. She was preparing Tyler for the destruction of our family, making him complicit in her betrayal. By the time we reached our house, I made several decisions. First, I wouldn't confront Harmony immediately. She'd had months to perfect her lies. She could explain away anything I threw at her in the heat of the moment. Second, I needed to know everything. who Simon was, how long this had been going on, what exactly they were planning. Third, and most importantly, I was going to destroy them both. Harmony arrived home an hour later, full of stories about Tyler's wonderful day with Grandma and Grandpa Porter. She described lunch in detail, invented conversations, even mentioned how Margaret had taught Tyler a new card game. The ease with which she lied was breathtaking. "Oh, and Keith," she said as she prepared dinner, "I've been thinking, maybe we should visit my parents more often. Tyler loves spending time there, and they're not getting any younger." I nodded along, playing the devoted husband while my mind cataloged every lie, every manipulation. "That's a great idea. Maybe I'll join you next Sunday." For just a moment, I saw panic flash across her face. "Oh, you don't need to do that. I know how busy you are with work. Besides, it's nice for Tyler to have special time with his grandparents. Still, I'd like to see Robert and Margaret. It's been too long." "Of course," she said, but I could see the wheels turning in her head, already formulating new lies to cover her tracks. That night, after Harmony fell asleep, I began my investigation. I started with her phone, which she'd left charging on the nightstand. She'd always been trusting about her privacy, never bothering with complex passwords. The passcode was Tyler's birthday. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Months of text messages with someone listed as Sarah from work, clearly a fake contact name. The messages were explicitly sexual, filled with promises and plans. But more than that, they revealed the depth of her deception. She wasn't just having an affair. She was systematically dismantling our marriage from the inside. Messages about how Keith suspects nothing, how boring our life together was, how she deserved better than a simple construction worker. Plans for a future that involved taking Tyler and starting fresh somewhere else. Discussions about my business, my assets, my routines, all shared with her lover like intelligence reports. Simon Thompson, that was his real name, revealed in one of the earlier messages where she'd accidentally used it instead of her code name for him. A quick search on my laptop revealed he was a real estate agent, divorced, with a reputation for aggressive sales tactics and a lifestyle that seemed to exceed his apparent income. The most damning discovery was a series of photos she'd shared with him. Pictures of our house, our financials that she'd photographed from my desk, even images of Tyler sleeping in his bed. She was providing the stranger with a complete dossier of our lives. But the message that finally pushed me over the edge was dated just 3 days ago. Keith's been working late on the Douglas project. Perfect time to get more photos of his business records. Simon says the construction company alone should be worth over $2 million if we can prove he's hiding assets. They weren't just planning to destroy my marriage. They were planning to rob me blind in the process. I spent the rest of the night learning everything I could about Simon Thompson. 34 years old, divorced 2 years ago under messy circumstances involving suspected infidelity. His ex-wife had gotten very little in the settlement, which suggested he was skilled at hiding assets. He worked for Pinnacle Realty, one of the larger firms in the area, and drove a silver BMW sedan, the same car Tyler had seen. Most interesting was his address, a luxury apartment complex that was definitely above what a mid-level real estate agent could afford. Either he was better at his job than his reviews suggested, or he had other sources of income. By morning, I had a plan. I'd always been methodical in my business dealings. Success in construction required careful planning, attention to detail, and the ability to see several steps ahead. You had to anticipate problems before they arose, have contingencies in place, and never let emotions cloud your judgment. I would approach this betrayal the same way I'd approach a complex building project. First, reconnaissance. Gather all the information, understand all the players, identify weaknesses and opportunities. Then, careful planning. Map out every step, every possible complication, every response to their likely moves. Finally, execution. Swift, thorough, and completely devastating. Over the next 2 weeks, I hired a private investigator named Peter Wright, recommended by my lawyer Jared Rogers. Peter was a former police detective who specialized in domestic investigations, and his rates were high enough to ensure discretion. "I need to know everything," I told him in his cramped office above a pawn shop. "Every meeting, every location, every person they talk to. Financial records, background checks, anything you can legally obtain. Peter studied the photos I'd printed from Harmony's phone. This is pretty extensive betrayal, Mr. Hill. Are you sure you want to go down this road? Sometimes it's easier to just cut your losses and move on. They're planning to take my son and rob me of everything I've built, I said. Moving on isn't an option. He nodded slowly. Okay, but understand, once we open this door, there's no closing it. You're going to learn things that will change how you see everything. Your wife, your marriage, maybe even yourself. Good. I want to see everything clearly. The first report came back a week later, and it was devastating in its thoroughness. Peter had tracked their movements, photographed their meetings, even recorded some of their conversations from his van using a parabolic microphone. Simon Thompson wasn't just a real estate agent. He was a specialist in what he called life transitions, helping people disappear from their old lives and start fresh somewhere else. Usually, this involved women who were divorcing wealthy husbands and wanted to hide assets before the proceedings began. Harmony wasn't his first mark. In fact, she was the third woman in 2 years he'd seduced for this specific purpose. The previous two had successfully divorced their husbands, hidden significant assets, and started new lives in other states, with Simon taking a substantial cut of their gains. But this time was different. This time, Simon had gotten emotionally involved. The recorded conversations revealed that he genuinely cared for Harmony, and more troubling, he'd convinced her that taking Tyler was not just possible but necessary. The kid's attached to you now, I heard him say in one recording. Keith won't fight for custody if he thinks Tyler wants to be with us. And once we're in Florida, establishing residency, it'll be almost impossible for him to get the boy back. Florida. They were planning to move to Florida. The final piece of intelligence Peter provided was a timeline. They were planning to make their move in 3 weeks, right after I completed the Douglas project and received the final payment of $400,000. Harmony would file for divorce, claim I was abusive and an unfit father, and request emergency custody of Tyler. By the time the courts sorted everything out, they'd be long gone. As I sat in my study, surrounded by photos, recordings, and documented evidence of their betrayal, I felt a cold satisfaction settle over me. They'd made one critical mistake in their perfect plan. They'd underestimated Keith Hill. Time to show them exactly who they were dealing with. Chapter 3, The Web Titans. I began my counteroffensive with the same precision I used to build houses, from the foundation up. Over the next week, I quietly moved the bulk of our liquid assets into accounts that Harmony couldn't access, using legitimate business restructuring as cover. I'd learned from Simon's previous victims' mistakes. They'd left their finances vulnerable until it was too late. My lawyer, Jared Rogers, helped me establish a family trust with Tyler as the beneficiary and me as the sole trustee. On paper, it looked like standard estate planning. In reality, it made most of our wealth untouchable by divorce proceedings. You sure about this approach, Keith? Jared asked as we finalized the paperwork. It might be seen as vindictive. What's vindictive is plotting to kidnap my son and steal everything I've worked for, I replied. I'm just protecting what's mine. Next, I approached Julian Douglas, the tech entrepreneur whose mansion I'd just completed. Julian had been impressed with my work and had mentioned wanting to invest in local businesses. I offered him a partnership opportunity. He would buy a 40% stake in Hill Construction, providing capital for expansion while I retained control of operations. Interesting timing, Julian observed over lunch at the country club. Most contractors would wait until they needed the money. I prefer to think ahead, I said. Besides, with the right partner, we could expand into commercial development, maybe even some projects in Florida. Julian's eyes lit up. He was always looking for new ventures, and Florida's booming construction market was attractive to investors. By the end of lunch, we'd shaken hands on a deal that would make my construction company technically a joint venture. When Harmony's lawyers came looking for assets to divide, they'd find that my business was largely owned by Julian Douglas, with me as a minority partner and salaried employee. But financial protection was just the beginning. The real trap required something more personal. Through Peter Wright, I learned that Simon's weakness was his ego. He genuinely believed he was smarter than everyone around him, especially the simple husbands he'd helped his previous partner's divorce. He'd grown careless, confident that his system was foolproof. I decided to use that arrogance against him. Acting on Peter's intelligence about their meeting spots, I began appearing at the same locations by coincidence. The coffee shop where they met Tuesday mornings became my new favorite place to review construction plans. The park where they walked became my new jogging route. The restaurant where they had intimate dinners became where I took clients for business meals. I never approached them directly, but I made sure Simon noticed me. A man protective of his secret affair would be paranoid about the husband showing up in too many of the same places. The psychological pressure worked better than I'd hoped. Within a week, Harmony was asking nervous questions about my new routines. "Since when do you drink coffee at Cafe Luna?" she asked one evening. "Julian Douglas recommended it. Says they have the best coffee in town for morning meetings." Perfectly innocent, perfectly plausible. "And you're jogging at Memorial Park now? I thought you hated jogging." "Doctor says I need more cardio. The park has nice trails." Again, reasonable and verifiable if she decided to check. I could see the stress building in her. She was texting more frequently, going to the bathroom to make phone calls, jumping whenever her phone buzzed. Simon was clearly pressuring her to move up their timeline, but she needed more time to gather the financial information he wanted. The pressure intensified when I made my next move. I hired Catalina Ruiz, a stunning Latina woman who worked as a freelance interior designer, to help me plan renovations for our house. Catalina was professional, talented, and most importantly, single and attractive enough to trigger Harmony's jealousy. "I want to surprise my wife with a complete redesign of our master bedroom," I told Catalina during our first consultation, making sure to schedule it for a time when Harmony would be home. Harmony's reaction was immediate and predictable. She became possessive, asking detailed questions about Catalina, insisting on being present for all our meetings, even offering to help with the design process. "She seems very friendly," Harmony said after Catalina's second visit. "She's professional and talented. Julian Douglas recommended her. She designed his entire house." The mention of Julian's name added another layer of legitimacy while reminding Harmony that I was developing relationships with wealthy, powerful people. People who could afford the best lawyers, the best investigators, the best of everything. Meanwhile, Peter Wright was documenting every meeting between Harmony and Simon, every lie she told, every step of their plan. The evidence was overwhelming, but I needed something more dramatic for the finale I had in mind. That opportunity came when Peter discovered something interesting about Simon's apartment. "He's not just hiding assets," Peter reported. "He's got surveillance equipment set up in his bedroom. Professional-grade stuff. I think he's been recording his encounters with your wife." Recording them. The implications were staggering. Was Simon planning to blackmail Harmony if she got cold feet? Or was he just the type of predator who collected trophies? Either way, it gave me the perfect weapon for my revenge. I had Peter obtain copies of Simon's recordings through methods I didn't ask about and didn't want to know. What mattered was that I now had proof of their affair that was so explicit and undeniable that no court would grant Harmony custody of Tyler. More than that, I had evidence that Simon was the type of man who secretly recorded intimate encounters, something that would destroy his reputation and possibly his freedom if it became public. But I wasn't ready to play that card yet. First, I wanted them to make their move, to fully commit to their betrayal, so they couldn't claim it was all a misunderstanding or temporary lapse in judgment. The opportunity came sooner than expected. 3 weeks after my discovery at the Porter's house, Harmony announced that she wanted to take Tyler to visit her parents for an extended weekend. "Mom's been feeling under the weather," she said, avoiding eye contact. "I think Tyler's presence would cheer her up. We'd leave Friday afternoon and come back Monday evening." This was it, their escape plan. A long weekend that would give them time to get to Florida and establish residency before I even knew they were gone. "That sounds wonderful," I said. "I'll miss you both, but family comes first." You don't mind?" "Of course not. Besides, Catalina and I are planning to do some intensive work on the bedroom renovation. It'll be easier without disruptions." I saw the flash of jealousy and suspicion in her eyes. Perfect. Let her think I was having an affair too. It would make her feel justified in what she was about to do. That night, as she slept beside me for what she thought would be the last time, I finalized my own plans. By Monday evening, Harmony Porter Hill and Simon Thompson would discover exactly what happened to people who try to steal from Keith Hill. They were about to learn that some houses of cards collapse spectacularly when you pull the wrong foundation stone. Chapter 4. The Hunters Become the Hunted. Friday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of autumn. I watched Harmony pack Tyler's small suitcase with the same methodical care she'd brought to our entire marriage. Except now, I knew it was all performance. Every folded shirt, every carefully chosen toy was part of her elaborate deception. Be good for Mommy and Grandma, I told Tyler, lifting him for what Harmony believed would be our final embrace. He hugged me tight, his small arms trusting and innocent. I will, Daddy. Uncle Simon says we're going to see the ocean. The ocean. So they were definitely heading to Florida, probably to a house Simon had already prepared. I smiled and kissed Tyler's forehead, knowing I'd see him again much sooner than they expected. After they left, I put the first phase of my plan into motion. I called the office and told my secretary I was taking a long weekend to work on personal projects. Then I drove to a storage unit across town where I'd been preparing for this moment. Inside the unit were supplies I'd accumulated over the past 2 weeks. Camping gear, non-perishable food, burner phones, cash, and most importantly, a detailed dossier on Simon Thompson that went far beyond what Peter Wright had provided. You see, while Peter had been excellent at surveillance and gathering evidence, my own investigation had taken a darker turn. Using resources from my construction business, subcontractors who asked few questions, suppliers who dealt in gray market materials, workers who understood the value of discretion, I'd assembled a complete picture of Simon's operation. Simon Thompson wasn't just a real estate agent who helped women hide assets. He was a predator who specifically targeted married women with wealthy husbands and young children. His method was always the same. Seduce the wife, convince her she deserved better, help her plan the escape, then take a substantial cut of everything she stole from her husband. But there was something else. Something Peter's investigation had missed because he'd focused on the legal aspects of Simon's crimes. Simon had a history of violence. His first ex-wife, Naomi Foster, had filed a police report alleging domestic abuse, but had withdrawn it when Simon agreed to a quick, quiet divorce. His second victim, Allison Briggs, had disappeared entirely after their affair ended badly. Officially, she'd moved to Europe to start fresh, but I'd found evidence suggesting otherwise. Most damning was what I discovered about his third victim, Chloe Carter. She died in what was ruled an accidental drowning at a beach house in Florida, just 3 months after her divorce was finalized and she'd received her settlement. Simon had been conveniently out of town when it happened, but he'd inherited everything as her boyfriend and designated beneficiary. Simon Thompson wasn't just a con artist. He was a serial killer who used romance and legal manipulation to destroy families and eliminate witnesses. And he had my wife and son. By Friday evening, they were in a beach house outside Tampa, based on a GPS tracker I'd hidden in Tyler's backpack. I knew this because I was watching from a rental car parked 2 blocks away. Getting to Florida had required calling in favors and cutting some corners. Julian Douglas owned a small jet that he used for business travel, and when I'd explained that I needed to handle an urgent family emergency in Florida, he'd offered to let me use it. I'd told him just enough of the truth, that Harmony was cheating and planning to take Tyler, to earn his sympathy and support. Take the jet, he'd said. And Keith, whatever you need to do to protect your son, you have my full backing. Now, as I watched the beach house where my family was supposed to be starting their new life, I felt the cold satisfaction of a plan coming together perfectly. They thought they were safe. They thought they'd escaped cleanly, that I wouldn't discover their absence until Monday night. They thought I was home, probably drinking myself into depression while Catalina Ruiz consoled me. Instead, I was one step ahead, armed with information they couldn't imagine I possessed, ready to end their fairy tale in the most brutal way possible. I waited until 2 a.m. when the house was dark and silent. Then I made my move. The beach house was typical of Simon's operation, isolated, rented under a false name, with multiple exit routes and few neighbors. It was perfect for privacy, which meant it was equally perfect for what I had planned. I learned a lot of skills building houses from the ground up. Lock picking, security systems, structural engineering. They were all just tools of the trade. Getting into the house was easier than breaking into most of the construction sites I'd worked on. I found Tyler first, asleep in a small bedroom decorated with seashells and starfish. He looked peaceful, completely unaware that his world was about to change forever. I carefully lifted him from the bed, grateful that he was a deep sleeper, and carried him to my rental car. Only when he was safely secured in the back seat did I return to the house to deal with Harmony and Simon. They were in the master bedroom, and from the scattered clothes and champagne bottles, it was clear they'd been celebrating their successful escape. Simon lay on his back, snoring softly, one arm draped possessively over my wife. I stood in the doorway for a moment, studying them. 7 years of marriage, and I'd never seen Harmony look as relaxed as she did in the arms of this predator. Even in sleep, she seemed more alive, more vibrant than she'd ever been with me. That observation should have hurt. Instead, it confirmed that I was doing the right thing. I woke Simon first, pressing the barrel of a gun, untraceable, purchased through construction industry contacts, against his temple. "Good morning, Simon," I whispered. "Time to wake up." His eyes snapped open, immediately alert. I had to give him credit. He was experienced enough to recognize danger when it was pressed against his skull. "Who are you?" he whispered. "I'm Keith Hill, Harmony's husband, Tyler's father, the man whose life you've been planning to destroy." Harmony stirred at the sound of our voices, and when she saw me standing over them with a gun, she screamed. "Keith, oh my God, what are you doing here? How did you find us?" "Shut up," I said calmly. "Both of you get dressed." Slowly, no sudden movements. As they fumbled for their clothes, I explained how I discovered their plan, how I'd been watching them for weeks, how I knew everything about Simon's previous victims. "You made one mistake," I told Simon as he pulled on his pants. "You assumed I was just another stupid husband who'd never see it coming. But I built a multi-million-dollar business from nothing. I don't miss details, and I don't let people steal from me." "Look, Keith," Simon said, his voice taking on the smooth, persuasive tone he probably used to sell houses, "this doesn't have to get violent. We can work something out. Harmony and we fell in love. It wasn't planned. These things happen." I laughed, a sound that made both of them flinch. "Simon, I know about Naomi Foster. I know about Allison Briggs. I know about Chloe Carter. You don't fall in love with your victims. You hunt them. And when you're done using them, you dispose of them." The color drained from Simon's face. Harmony looked confused, glancing between us. "Keith, what are you talking about? Who are these women?" "Tell her, Simon. Tell her about your previous wives and girlfriends. Tell her what happened to them after they outlived their usefulness." Simon's shoulders sagged as he realized the depth of my knowledge. "You don't understand the whole situation." "I understand enough. You're a serial killer who uses romance and financial manipulation to destroy families. But this time you picked the wrong family." Harmony was crying now, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. "Keith, please. Tyler needs his mother. Whatever Simon has done, I didn't know about it. I thought I loved him." "You thought wrong," I said. "And Tyler is fine. He's safe in my car, still asleep. By tomorrow, he'll be back home where he belongs." "What are you going to do to us?" Simon asked. I smiled, and from their expressions, I could tell it wasn't a pleasant sight. "That depends on how cooperative you are with my plan." Chapter 5, The Reckoning. What happened next would forever change how I saw myself, but I felt no hesitation in that beach house bedroom. These two had planned to destroy my life, steal my son, and in Simon's case, eventually eliminate the only witness to his crimes, my wife. "Here's what's going to happen," I told them, keeping the gun trained on Simon while they finished dressing. "We're going to take a little trip. There's an abandoned construction site about an hour from here. A project that was started and then abandoned when the developer ran out of money. Very isolated. Very private." "Keith, please," Harmony sobbed. "I know I made mistakes, but this isn't you. You're not a killer." "You're right," I said. "I'm not a killer. I'm a builder. And sometimes, before you can build something new, you have to tear down what's rotten." The drive to the construction site was conducted in complete silence. Simon drove his BMW with Harmony in the passenger seat, while I followed in my rental car with Tyler still sleeping peacefully in the back. Every few minutes, I'd check the rearview mirror to make sure my son was okay, reminding myself why this was necessary. The construction site was perfect for my purposes, a half-built luxury resort that had been abandoned when the investors were arrested for fraud. The concrete foundations had been poured, the basic framework erected, but no walls or roof had been installed. It was essentially a concrete maze in the middle of nowhere, invisible from any road. I discovered it during my reconnaissance of the area, and it had given me the perfect idea for Simon and Harmony's fate. Once we arrived, I marched them to the center of the unfinished structure, where a large concrete mixer sat abandoned among piles of construction materials. Do you know what happens to concrete when it sets around something? I asked conversationally. Neither of them answered. It creates a perfect seal, airtight, permanent. In ancient Rome, they used to execute traitors by encasing them in concrete while it was still wet. The victims would be alive when the process started, but not for long. "You're insane," Simon said, but his voice shook with fear. "No, I'm thorough. See, I could just shoot you both and dump your bodies in the ocean. But that's messy, unpredictable. Bodies wash up. Evidence gets found. This way, you simply disappear. Another tragic case of people who vanished without a trace." I gestured to the concrete mixer. "This still has a full load of concrete from when the workers abandoned the site. All I have to do is add water, and it'll be ready to pour." Harmony was hyperventilating now. "Keith, I'll do anything. I'll sign papers giving up all rights to Tyler. I'll disappear forever. Just please don't kill me." "It's too late for bargains," I said. "You made your choice when you decided to steal my son and my life." But as I spoke, I noticed something in Simon's posture. The fear was still there, but underneath it was calculation. He was looking for an opening, a chance to turn the tables. "You know what your problem is, Keith?" Simon said suddenly. "You're too emotional, too attached. That's why you'll never be truly successful." "Is that so?" "Men like you build things, you accumulate wealth, but you never understand power. Real power isn't about money or muscles or even guns. It's about information, about having something your enemies need." He was stalling, trying to keep me talking while he figured out his next move. I decided to let him try. "And what could you possibly have that I need?" Simon smiled, and for the first time since I'd held the gun to his head, he looked confident. "Tyler isn't your son." The words hit me like a physical blow. Harmony's gasp told me she was as shocked as I was. "What?" "Harmony and I have been together for over 2 years, not just a few months like you think." "That little boy in your car? He's mine. I've been waiting for the right time to tell you, but I figured saving our lives might be a good occasion." I looked at Harmony, who was shaking her head frantically. "That's not true. Keith, he's lying. Tyler is your son." But Simon was pulling out his phone, swiping to a photo gallery. "DNA test results," he said, showing me the screen. "Had them done 6 months ago when I started planning our escape. Tyler Hill is actually Tyler Thompson. He's my boy, Keith. You've been raising another man's child for 5 years." The rage that filled me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Not just at the betrayal, but the theft of 5 years of fatherhood, 5 years of believing I was building something for my son's future. But then I looked closer at the phone screen, and I started laughing. "These are very convincing, Simon. Professional quality forgeries. You must have paid a lot for them. They're not fake." "Yes, they are. Because I had Tyler tested myself 3 years ago when Harmony had that brief scare about a possible genetic condition. The test confirmed that Tyler is definitely my biological son. But more importantly, these photos on your phone show a date from 6 months ago, but they reference lab procedures that weren't available until 2 months ago. You're using an updated form to fake older results." Simon's face went white as he realized his bluff had failed. "You see, this is the difference between us," I continued. "You're clever, but you're not careful. You make mistakes because you underestimate people. I don't make those kinds of errors." "Keith," Harmony said desperately, "if Tyler really is your son, then you have to think about what's best for him. He needs his mother. He needs He needs to grow up knowing that actions have consequences. I interrupted. That betrayal has a price. That his father is not a man to be crossed. I moved toward the concrete mixer, and both of them stepped backward. But here's the thing, I said, stopping just short of the machine. I lied about the concrete. They looked confused. Oh, I'm definitely going to kill you both. But not with concrete. That was just to scare you, to make you understand the gravity of your situation. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a second phone, one of the burner phones I'd purchased. What I'm actually going to do is much simpler and much more poetic. I showed them the screen, which displayed a video recording of their entire conversation from the past 20 minutes. You see, Simon, you just confessed to being a serial killer on camera. You admitted to murdering your previous victims. And Harmony, you just admitted to willingly participating in a plan to kidnap my son and steal my assets. But you forced us to say those things at gunpoint. Did I? Let me check the recording. I rewound the video and played it back. No, I don't hear any threats. I hear a confession from a serial killer and his accomplice. Of course, the full recording will show the context, but edited properly. The implications were sinking in. You're not going to kill us, Harmony said slowly. You're going to destroy us. Now you're starting to understand. Simon, by Monday morning, copies of this recording will be delivered to the FBI, the Florida State Police, and the families of your previous victims. Your face will be on every news channel in the country. Your name will be synonymous with the worst kind of predator. I turned to Harmony. And you, my dear wife, will be known as the woman who helped a serial killer try to kidnap a child. The woman who betrayed her family for a murderer. Tyler will grow up knowing exactly what kind of person his mother really was. You bastard, Simon snarled, lunging toward me. I sidestepped easily and brought the gun down on the back of his head. He collapsed to the concrete, unconscious but alive. That's for putting your hands on my son, I said. Harmony was crying uncontrollably now. Keith, please. We can work this out. I'll do anything. You're right. You will do anything I tell you to. Because if you don't, this recording goes public and Tyler learns that his mother is a criminal who tried to help a killer steal him away from his father. I explained her new reality as clinically as I'd explain a construction contract. She would divorce me quietly, taking only what I chose to give her. She would relinquish all parental rights to Tyler without contest. She would disappear from our lives completely, moving far away and never attempting to contact our son. In exchange, I would not release the recording. I would not press kidnapping charges. I would allow her to maintain some shred of dignity by claiming the divorce was mutual. But if you ever try to contact Tyler, if you ever try to interfere in his life, if you ever try to claim you were coerced or threatened, the recording goes public and you spend the rest of your life in prison. When Simon regained consciousness, I gave him a similar offer. He could disappear, change his name, start over somewhere far away. Or he could face the consequences of his recorded confession. You can't prove any of those other deaths were murder, he said weakly. I don't have to. The confession combined with the evidence I've already gathered will be enough to destroy your life. Every cold case involving a missing woman will be reopened with your name attached. Every family you've destroyed will have a target for their rage. You'll never be safe. As dawn broke over the abandoned construction site, I walked away from the two people who had tried to destroy everything I'd built. They were alive, but their lives as they knew them were over. Tyler was still sleeping peacefully in my car when I drove away. Chapter 6, New Foundations. The flight back to our home state was quiet. Tyler had woken up confused about his surroundings, but I'd explained that Mommy had gotten sick and had to stay in Florida for a while. He accepted this with the trusting simplicity of a 5-year-old, more interested in the airplane than in asking difficult questions. By Sunday evening, we were back in our house. Tyler played with his toys while I sat in my study, planning the next phase of my life. The phone calls would start Monday morning. First my lawyer, then to Peter Wright to tie up loose ends, then to Julie and Douglas to discuss our business partnership. But tonight was for father and son. Daddy, Tyler said as I tucked him into bed. When is Mommy coming home? Mommy isn't coming home, buddy. She decided she wanted to live somewhere else, somewhere far away. Did I do something wrong? The question broke my heart. I knelt beside his bed and looked into his innocent eyes, eyes that held my features, my genetics, my future. No, Tyler, you didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups make bad choices, and other grown-ups have to make hard choices to fix things. But I want you to remember something very important. What? Your daddy will never leave you. Your daddy will always protect you. And your daddy will always make sure you have everything you need to grow up strong and good. He hugged me tight, and I felt the final pieces of Keith Hill the husband die away, replaced completely by Keith Hill the father. Monday morning brought the calls I'd been expecting. Harmony's panicked voice on one of my burner phones, begging me to reconsider. Simon's desperate attempts to negotiate. Both of them had apparently spent the weekend researching just how much evidence I had against them, and the reality of their situation was sinking in. The deal stands, I told each of them. Disappear quietly or face the consequences publicly. By Wednesday, the divorce papers were filed. Harmony cited irreconcilable differences and requested nothing. No alimony, no property division, no custody. The court date was set for the following month, a mere formality to finalize what was already decided. Peter Wright delivered the final pieces of evidence I needed to ensure my protection. Bank records showing that Harmony had been transferring small amounts of money to accounts under false names. Email records of her communications with Simon about their plans. Most importantly, documentation of Simon's real identity and criminal history that would make any future claims of coercion laughable. You've got enough here to put them both away for years, Peter observed. Are you sure you want to let them walk? Prison would be too easy, I said. This way, they have to live with what they've become. They have to start over with nothing, always looking over their shoulders, always knowing that I could destroy them completely if I chose to. The construction business flourished under my partnership with Julian Douglas. With his capital and connections, we expanded into commercial development, then into real estate investment. Within 6 months, Hill Douglas Development was bidding on projects across 3 states. More importantly, the business structure Julian and I had created made my assets virtually untouchable by any future legal challenges. Even if Harmony or Simon tried to claim they'd been coerced, they would find that the man they tried to rob was no longer the owner of the wealth they coveted. Tyler adjusted to life without his mother with remarkable resilience. I hired Riley Floyd, a woman in her 50s who'd raised 4 children of her own, to help with childcare and household management. She was kind but firm, nurturing but not permissive, exactly what Tyler needed. Where did Mommy go? He asked one evening about 3 weeks after our return. She went to live in a place where she thought she'd be happier, I said. But sometimes, when people think they want something different, they make mistakes they can't fix. Will I see her again? I don't know, buddy. But remember what I told you, Daddy will always be here, and Daddy will always take care of you. He seemed satisfied with that answer. The months that followed were the most peaceful of my adult life. Without the constant stress of Harmony's deception, without the background noise of a failing marriage, I could focus entirely on the 2 things that mattered, raising my son and building our future. Tyler thrived. His grades in kindergarten were excellent, his behavior exemplary. He made friends easily and showed an early aptitude for building things, already asking questions about how houses were constructed, how machines worked, how to make things stronger and better. He's got your mind, Riley observed one evening as we watched Tyler construct an elaborate fort out of building blocks. Methodical, careful. He thinks 3 steps ahead. Good, I said. He'll need those qualities in this world. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I received a call from Peter Wright. Thought you'd want to know, he said. Simon Thompson was found dead in a motel outside Las Vegas. Apparent suicide. Left a note confessing to the murders of 3 women. I felt no satisfaction at the news, but no sorrow either. Simon had chosen his path long before he encountered my family. His death was simply the logical conclusion of a life built on predation and violence. What about the note? I asked. Nothing about you or your wife. Just the 3 previous victims. Looks like he couldn't live with what he'd done. Or he couldn't live with the constant fear of exposure. The knowledge that his past was always one phone call away from catching up with him. Either way, Simon Thompson was no longer my problem. I never learned what happened to Harmony. She disappeared as completely as I demanded, leaving no forwarding address, no contact information, no trace of her new life. Sometimes I wondered if she'd found peace, if she'd learned to live with her choices. But mostly, I didn't think about her at all. The woman I'd married had been a creation, a performance designed to extract everything of value from my life. The real Harmony had been revealed in those text messages, those recorded conversations, those calculated betrayals. I felt no more obligation to that person than I would to any other criminal who'd try to rob me. Chapter 7. The Reckoning. 2 years after Harmony's disappearance, I had built something better than what I'd lost. Hill Douglas Development was approaching a valuation of $50 million, with projects in 7 states and a reputation that attracted the most prestigious clients. Tyler was thriving in 2nd grade, showing remarkable intelligence and emotional stability for a child who'd lost his mother under traumatic circumstances. But the past has a way of reasserting itself when you least expect it. The call came on a Tuesday evening in March. I was helping Tyler with a science project about simple machines when my personal phone rang. The number was blocked, but I answered anyway. "Hello, Keith." Harmony's voice hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't heard it in 2 years, but I recognized it immediately. "Tyler, go to your room and work on your project," I said calmly. "Daddy needs to take this call." Once my son was out of earshot, I walked into my study and closed the door. "You're violating our agreement," I said. "Our agreement is void," Harmony replied. "Simon is dead, which means I don't have to worry about his crimes being discovered. And I've spent the last 2 years building a new life, a clean life. I want my son back." "Your son? You gave up all parental rights. You disappeared without a word. Tyler thinks you're dead." "I was coerced. You threatened to kill me." I laughed, the same cold sound that had terrified her in that Florida beach house. "Is that the story you're going with?" "Because I still have the recording of our conversation that night. The one where you confessed to planning to kidnap Tyler and steal my assets. Would you like me to refresh your memory?" There was a long pause. "Things have changed, Keith. I remarried. My new husband is well-connected, powerful. He has resources that could make your life very difficult." "And who is this powerful new husband?" "Richard Williams. Maybe you've heard of him." I had. Richard Williams was a federal prosecutor, ambitious and politically connected, known for his high-profile corruption cases. If Harmony had convinced him that she was the victim of an abusive ex-husband who'd stolen her child, he could indeed make my life difficult. "How much does your new husband know about your past?" I asked. "He knows everything that matters. He knows you threatened me, forced me to sign away my rights to my son, and made me disappear to protect myself. Does he know about Simon? About your plan to flee to Florida? About the fact that you were committing adultery for over a year?" Another pause, shorter this time. "Those are lies you made me say at gunpoint." "Harmony, you're making a mistake. You had a clean exit. You could have started over anywhere, been anyone you wanted to be. Why come back now?" "Because I never stopped thinking about Tyler. Because I realized that no matter what I'd done, no matter what mistakes I'd made, I'm still his mother. And because Richard has shown me that there are ways to fight back against bullies like you." The line went dead. I sat in my study for a long time, considering my options. Harmony had made a calculated move, using her new husband's position to try to reclaim what she'd lost. But she'd also made several critical errors in judgment. First, she'd assumed that my evidence against her had lost its power with Simon's death. Second, she'd assumed that Richard Williams would remain supportive once he learned the full truth about his new wife. Third, she'd assumed that 2 years had made me soft, that success and stability had blunted my edge. She was wrong on all counts. I called Peter Wright first. "I need everything you can get on Richard Williams. Financial records, political connections, career history, personal weaknesses. And I need it fast." "How fast?" 24 hours. Spare no expense." Next, I called Julian Douglas. "Julian, I need a favor. A big one." "Name it." "I may need character references, potentially legal support, possibly even political pressure. My ex-wife is trying to use her new husband's position as a federal prosecutor to challenge our custody arrangement. Consider it done. Anyone who tries to hurt your family hurts mine." What do you need me to do? The network I'd built over the past 2 years was about to prove its value. Julian had connections to senators, governors, federal judges. My construction projects had created relationships with police chiefs, district attorneys, and influential businessmen across multiple states. The quiet, methodical approach I'd taken to rebuilding my life had given me resources that Harmony couldn't imagine. But the real key to handling this threat was understanding Richard Williams himself. Peter's report arrived 18 hours later, and it was fascinating reading. Richard Williams was indeed powerful and ambitious, but he was also incredibly image-conscious. His political aspirations depended on maintaining a reputation for integrity and family values. He'd built his career on prosecuting corrupt officials and protecting innocent victims. More importantly, he'd been married before to a woman named Bryn Reed who divorced him 5 years ago, citing emotional abuse and controlling behavior. The divorce records were sealed, but Peter had found evidence suggesting that Williams had used his position to intimidate his ex-wife into accepting an unfavorable settlement. This was a man who had a pattern of using his power to control women, which meant he was exactly the type of person who would be attracted to Harmony's victim narrative. But it also meant he was exactly the type of person who would turn vicious if he discovered he'd been manipulated. I spent that evening crafting my response. Not a direct confrontation. That would play into Harmony's hands, making me look like the aggressive ex-husband she was portraying. Instead, I would give Richard Williams the information he needed to see his new wife clearly and let him draw his own conclusions. The package I sent to Williams contained no threatening letters, no demands, no emotional appeals. Just facts. Copies of Harmony's text messages with Simon. Bank records showing the money transfers. Photos of them together in Florida. Most importantly, the recording of our conversation that night at the construction site, carefully edited to remove any context that might suggest coercion. I included a simple cover letter. Mr. Williams, I believe you have a right to know who you married. I also believe that, as a prosecutor, you have an obligation to recognize evidence when you see it. The woman you're trying to help is not the victim she's portrayed herself to be. She's a calculating predator who destroyed one family and is now attempting to destroy another. I hope you'll consider these facts before proceeding with any legal action. I sent the package to his home address on a Saturday, ensuring that Harmony would be present when he received it. Monday morning, my phone rang. Keith Hill, this is Richard Williams. I think we need to talk. His voice was different from what I'd expected. Tired, defeated. I'd be happy to discuss the situation, I said. Not over the phone. Can you meet me for lunch today? We met at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place where federal prosecutors conduct unofficial business. Williams looked older than his photos, his hair graying prematurely, his eyes holding the cynical weariness of a man who'd seen too much of humanity's worst impulses. I've been married to Harmony for 8 months, he said without preamble. In that time, she's told me a dozen different versions of what happened with you. Each one painted her as more of a victim, you as more of a monster. And now I've seen evidence that suggests she's a pathological liar who manipulated me the same way she manipulated you. He paused, staring into his coffee. The woman I married doesn't exist, does she? No, she doesn't. The recording you sent me, that's really her confessing to adultery and planning to kidnap your son? That's really her, the woman you married. Williams was quiet for a long moment. I've spent my career putting criminals in prison. I pride myself on being able to read people, to see through deception. How'd I miss this? Because she's very good at what she does. She targets successful men who are vulnerable for one reason or another. Your divorce, my workaholic tendencies, she finds the weakness and exploits it. What do you want from me, Hill? I want you to stop enabling her. I want you to tell her that any attempt to challenge my custody of Tyler will result in all of this evidence becoming public. I want her to disappear again, permanently this time. And if I don't, I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then you'll find yourself married to a woman who's about to become the subject of a very public criminal investigation. Your career, your reputation, your political future, all of it will be destroyed by association. Williams nodded slowly. She told me you were a simple construction worker. Said you weren't smart enough to fight back effectively. Did she? Well, as you can see, she was wrong about that too. We finished lunch in relative silence. When Williams stood to leave, he paused at the table. For what it's worth, Hill, I think you're a better man than I am. If someone had done to me what she did to you, I don't think I would have been as restrained. I have a son to think about. That changes your priorities. 2 days later, I received a call from Harmony's lawyer, not Williams, but a private attorney she'd hired independently. Mr. Hill, my client would like to discuss a settlement regarding any future contact with her son. I'm listening. She's prepared to relinquish any claims to visitation or custody in perpetuity in exchange for your agreement, not to pursue criminal charges related to her past actions. Criminal charges? I don't know what you mean. Sir, my client believes you have evidence that could be used to prosecute her for attempted kidnapping and fraud. Your client is paranoid, but I'm willing to formalize our previous agreement. Complete severance of all parental rights, no future contact with my son, no claims against my assets. In exchange, I continue to maintain my privacy regarding our divorce. That's acceptable. The papers were signed that week. This time, the agreement was ironclad, crafted by the best family law attorneys money could buy, with penalties severe enough to deter any future challenges. Harmony Williams, she'd taken her new husband's name, disappeared from our lives as completely as she had 2 years earlier. But this time, I knew she wouldn't be back. Richard Williams resigned from his position 3 months later, citing personal reasons. Word around legal circles was that his marriage had ended badly, and he was moving to private practice in another state. I felt no sympathy for him. He'd chosen to involve himself in my family's affairs without understanding the full situation. Like everyone else who'd underestimated Keith Hill, he'd learned that actions have consequences. Chapter 8. Building Something New. Life settled into a rhythm that I found deeply satisfying. Tyler was now 8 years old, excelling in school and showing an early interest in engineering and construction. Our weekend projects had evolved from simple building blocks to actual construction work. I taught him to use basic tools safely, and he helped me build a tree house in our backyard that was architecturally sound enough to serve as a model for the luxury tree houses we were starting to build for wealthy clients. Hill Douglas Development had become one of the most respected firms in the region. Our projects were featured in architectural magazines, and we'd attracted attention from international investors. Julian and I had found a perfect partnership. His vision and capital combined with my practical expertise and meticulous execution. But the real measure of my success was Tyler himself. Dad, he said one evening as we reviewed the blueprints for a new office complex. Why did Mom really leave? He was old enough now to ask more sophisticated questions, to understand that the simple explanations I'd given him as a 5-year-old weren't the complete truth. I set down my pencil and looked at my son, really looked at him. He had my eyes, my determined jaw, but there was something else there too. A kindness that I hoped he'd inherited from someone better than either of his biological parents. Your mother made some choices that hurt our family, I said carefully. She forgot that being part of a family means putting the family first, ahead of your own wants. Was she a bad person? It was a fair question, and one I'd been dreading. I don't think people are simply good or bad, Tyler. I think people make good choices and bad choices. Your mother made some very bad choices, choices that would have hurt you if I hadn't stopped them. But that doesn't mean she was evil, just selfish. Do you miss her? I miss the person I thought she was. But that person wasn't real. The real your mother was someone I couldn't trust to protect you or our family. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. So you protected us instead. Yes, and I always will. That conversation marked a turning point in our relationship. Tyler began to understand that his family consisted of just the two of us, and that this wasn't a tragedy, but simply our reality. More importantly, he began to understand that his father was someone who could be counted on, who would face any threat to protect what mattered. The business continued to grow. We expanded into green construction, developing eco-friendly building techniques that attracted environmentally conscious clients. Julian's connections had opened doors to government contracts, and we were now building federal facilities that required the highest security clearances. The background investigations for these contracts have been extensive, examining every aspect of my life, including my divorce from Harmony. The investigators found nothing problematic. A man whose wife had abandoned him and their child, who'd fought to maintain custody and succeeded. If anything, the investigators seemed impressed by my dedication to single parenthood while building a successful business. One evening, as Tyler and I worked on a science fair project, a scale model of a suspension bridge, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was familiar. Keith Hill. Mr. Hill, this is Detective Zachary Cox with the Miami-Dade Police Department. I'm calling about a woman named Harmony Williams, who I understand used to be your wife. My blood chilled. What about her? She was found dead 3 days ago in her apartment. Apparent suicide. She left a note mentioning you and your son, and we're trying to tie up some loose ends. I set down my tools and walked into another room away from Tyler. What do the notes say? Mostly just regrets about leaving her son, wishes that things had been different. She mentioned that you've been a good father and that Tyler was lucky to have you. There's nothing that suggests any wrongdoing on your part. We're just calling everyone mentioned in the note to see if they had any recent contact with her. I haven't spoken to Harmony in over 2 years. She relinquished all parental rights and moved away. I didn't even know she was living in Miami. That matches what we found. Her neighbors said she kept to herself, seemed depressed. Her husband, ex-husband now, I guess, said she'd been struggling since their divorce. After Detective Cox hung up, I sat in my study for a long time, processing the information. Harmony was dead. The woman who'd tried to destroy my life, who'd planned to steal my son, who'd forced me to become someone harder and more ruthless than I'd ever intended to be. She was gone. I felt no satisfaction, no vindication, no sense of justice served. Just a profound emptiness, as if a chapter of my life had been closed without proper resolution. The death also raised practical concerns. Would there be an investigation into our divorce? Would someone dig into the circumstances that had led to Harmony's complete disappearance from Tyler's life? Would the carefully constructed narrative I'd built around her abandonment hold up under scrutiny? Over the next few weeks, I waited for those concerns to materialize. But they never did. Detective Cox never called back. No other investigators contacted me. Harmony's death was ruled a suicide. Her affairs were settled by a court-appointed administrator, and her name faded from the public record as completely as she'd faded from our lives. Tyler never learned about his mother's death. At 8 years old, he'd moved beyond asking about her, accepting that his family was just him and his father and the life we'd built together. There seemed no point in reopening old wounds or complicating his understanding of his origins. Instead, I focused on the future we were building. The business reached a new milestone when Julian and I were selected to design and build a new federal courthouse, a project worth over $100 million and guaranteed to cement our reputation as one of the premier construction firms in the country. Tyler started showing real aptitude for mathematics and engineering, asking increasingly sophisticated questions about structural engineering and material science. I began teaching him the fundamentals of construction management, not because I expected him to follow in my footsteps, but because I wanted him to understand the value of building something lasting and worthwhile. "Why do you always make everything so strong?" he asked one day as we toured one of our construction sites. He'd noticed that our buildings consistently exceeded code requirements for structural integrity. "Because when you build something, you're responsible for everyone who'll ever use it," I said. "If I cut corners to save money or time, and someone gets hurt because the building fails, that's on me. So I build everything to last, to protect the people inside." "Is that why you protected me from Mom? Because she might have hurt me?" The question caught me off guard. Tyler's understanding of the situation had evolved as he'd grown older, and his questions had become more perceptive. "Yes, that's exactly why." "Good," he said simply. "I'm glad you did." Looking at my son that day, standing confidently on a construction site in his hard hat and safety glasses, asking intelligent questions and drawing connections between our work and our family, I realized I'd succeeded in ways that went far beyond business success or personal revenge. I'd built something better than what I'd lost. I'd raised a son who understood loyalty, responsibility, and the importance of protecting what mattered. I'd created a life based on substance rather than deception, on earned respect rather than manipulated emotions. Harmony had tried to steal my future. Instead, she'd forced me to build a better one. Chapter 9, Legacy. 5 years had passed since Harmony's death, and Tyler was now 13, a teenager who bore an unmistakable resemblance to me, but possessed a warmth and openness that I hoped meant he'd learned from my experiences without inheriting my harder edges. Hill Douglas Development had become more than a regional success story. We were now a national firm with offices in 12 states, specializing in high-security government facilities and luxury private developments. The business that had started as my way of providing for my family had evolved into a legacy that would provide for Tyler's children and their children after them. But the real measure of what I'd built wasn't financial. "Dad, I've been thinking about Mom," Tyler said one evening as we reviewed his high school course selections. He was planning to take advanced mathematics and physics, already showing interest in following some version of my path. This wasn't the first time he'd brought up Harmony in recent years. As Tyler had matured, he'd naturally become curious about the parent he'd never really known. "What about her?" "I've been doing some research online. I found some old photos from when you two were married, some articles about the business from back then. You look different. Happier, maybe." I studied my son's face, tried to read what he was really asking. I was different then. Younger. More trusting. I thought I understood how the world worked. "Do you regret that?" Being more trusting. It was a sophisticated question from a 13-year-old, but Tyler had always been mature for his age. "I regret that your mother took advantage of that trust. But I don't regret having it in the first place. Trust is important, Tyler, but so is being careful about who deserves it. Would you trust someone like that again? If you met someone new?" The question surprised me. Tyler had never asked about my dating life, had never suggested that our family needed anything more than what we had. "Are you asking if I'm planning to remarry?" "I'm asking if what Mom did changed you so much that you'll never be able to trust anyone again." I set down the course catalog and really looked at my son. When had he become wise enough to ask such penetrating questions? "Your mother taught me that people can lie very convincingly about who they are and what they want. But you've taught me that some people are exactly who they appear to be. Honest, loyal, caring. The trick is learning to tell the difference." "How do you do that?" "Time. Observation. You watch how people behave when they think no one is looking. You see how they treat people who can't do anything for them. You pay attention to whether their actions match their words." Tyler nodded thoughtfully. "Is that why you test people?" "What do you mean?" "I've noticed that whenever you hire someone new, or whenever we meet someone you might want to work with, you create little situations to see how they'll react. Like when you accidentally left that envelope of cash on your desk when the new accountant was in your office alone. Or when you told Mr. Patterson that fake story about the permit delays to see if he'd try to bribe his way around them." I was impressed. Tyler had been observing my methods without my realizing it. "Those aren't tests, exactly. They're just prudent verification of character." "Same thing," Tyler said with a grin. "And it works, doesn't it? The accountant proved he was honest when he immediately told you about the money. Mr. Patterson proved he was corrupt when he offered you a bribe. You're very observant. I learned from watching you. You taught me that actions reveal character better than words." As Tyler grew older, these conversations became more frequent. He understood, without my having to explain explicitly, that our family had been forged in crisis, that the comfortable life we now enjoyed had been built on the ruins of betrayal and deception. More importantly, he understood that strength came not from avoiding hardship, but from facing it directly and refusing to be broken by it. The business continued to thrive, but I found myself thinking more about legacy, not just financial, but the values and lessons I was passing to my son. When Tyler turned 16, I made him a full partner in a subsidiary company I created, Hill Construction Training, which provided apprenticeship programs for young people interested in construction trades. It was his first real taste of business responsibility, and he approached it with the same methodical care I'd taught him to apply to everything else. "Why did you start this program?" he asked after his first board meeting. "Because not everyone gets the chances we've had. Some people grow up in families where betrayal and failure are the norm. I wanted to give them the opportunity to build something better. Like you did. Like we did. This is your legacy too, Tyler. Someday you'll have to decide what kind of man you want to be, what kind of family you want to build, what kind of impact you want to have on the world. I want to be like you. The simple statement hit me harder than I'd expected. No, I said, you should be better than me. You should take the good things I've taught you and leave behind the harder parts. You should learn from my experiences without having to live through the same betrayals. But what if I do? What if someone tries to hurt our family the way Mom did? I looked at my son, no longer a boy, but not yet a man, standing at the threshold of adulthood with questions that would shape the rest of his life. Then you'll handle it. But hopefully, you'll handle it better than I did. With more wisdom, less anger. More mercy, less vengeance. Don't you think you handled it the right way? It was a question I'd been asking myself for years. I handled it effectively. I protected you, preserved our assets, built a better life for both of us. But there were costs, things I had to do, lines I had to cross, parts of myself I had to harden. I don't regret those choices because they were necessary to protect you. But I hope you never have to make similar choices. Tyler was quiet for a moment. If you had to do it again, would you do anything differently? I would have seen the signs sooner. I would have been less trusting initially, more careful about who I let into our lives. Prevention is always better than response. Is that why you investigate everyone who gets close to us? I had to smile at his perceptiveness. Is it that obvious? To me, yes. But I think it's smart. Trust but verify, right? Right. As Tyler's 18th birthday approached, I began transitioning more responsibility to him. He'd proven himself capable of handling complex projects, managing teams of workers, and making the kind of difficult decisions that separated successful leaders from mere managers. But more than that, he'd proven himself to be the kind of man I'd hoped to raise. Strong but not cruel, careful but not paranoid, protective but not vindictive. On the night before his high school graduation, we sat on the deck behind our house, looking out at the city lights and talking about his plans for college and beyond. I've been accepted to MIT's engineering program, he said, but I've also been thinking about staying here, working full-time with the company. College first, I said firmly. The business will still be here when you graduate, but you need to experience life outside of what I've built for you. You need to meet people who don't know your history, who don't know our story. You need to find out who Tyler Hill is when he's not Keith Hill's son. What if I discover I'm not as strong as I think I am? Then you'll get stronger. What happened to our family taught me that you can't control what other people do to you, but you can always control how you respond. Strength isn't about avoiding challenges. It's about facing them and choosing to build something better from whatever remains. Tyler nodded, then asked the question I'd been expecting for years. Do you think Mom loved me? I think she loved the idea of you. I think she loved having a child, being a mother, being part of a family. But when it came time to choose between her comfort and your well-being, she chose herself. That's not love, Tyler. That's selfishness. Do you think she regretted it? At the end, I thought about Detective Cox's call, about Harmony's final note expressing regret about leaving her son. I think she regretted the consequences of her choices. But I don't think she truly understood the depth of what she'd done until it was too late to fix it. I'm glad you protected me from her. So am I. As Tyler prepared to leave for college, I realized that my greatest achievement wasn't the business empire I'd built or the revenge I'd exacted on those who betrayed me. It was the young man sitting beside me. Confident, thoughtful, principled, ready to build his own life while carrying forward the best of what I taught him. Harmony had tried to steal our future. Instead, she'd forced me to build a better one than I'd ever imagined possible. The boy she tried to take from me had become a man who understood loyalty, integrity, and the true meaning of family. He would build his own life, make his own choices, face his own challenges. But he would do so with the foundation I provided, a foundation built not on trust alone, but on strength, wisdom, and the unwavering commitment to protect what matters most. That was Keith Hill's true legacy. Not the business empire or the personal vindication, but the son who would carry forward the best of what I'd learned while leaving behind the hardest parts of who I'd been forced to become. As I watched Tyler pack for college, I realized that the scared, betrayed husband who discovered his wife's affair in an empty house had been transformed into something far more valuable. A father who'd built something unbreakable from the ruins of betrayal. The house that had held secrets had become the foundation for a legacy of strength, wisdom, and uncompromising love. And that was enough. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life Shattered. Blake Morrison had always prided himself on reading people. 20 years in private security, starting as military police and working his way up to running executive protection for Fortune 500 CEOs, had taught him to spot deception from across a room. Micro-expressions, body language, vocal patterns. He'd built a career on noticing what others missed, which made it all the more devastating that he'd been blind to what was happening in his own home. Saturday evening started like any other. Blake sat in his leather recliner, reviewing security assessments for a client's upcoming overseas trip. The house was quiet. Diana was at her book club, and their 8-year-old son Tyler was spending the night at Uncle Mike's house, as he'd done dozens of times before. Mike Torres wasn't actually Tyler's uncle, but he'd been Blake's partner at the security firm for 6 years before starting his own consulting business. More importantly, he'd been Blake's best friend since they met in basic training 15 years ago. Mike was Tyler's godfather, the guy who taught him to throw a football, the one who never missed a birthday party. Blake trusted Mike with his life. He'd literally done so on 3 different occasions during overseas assignments. The front door opened at 8:47 p.m. Blake glanced up from his laptop, expecting to see Diana returning early from book club with some neighborhood gossip. Instead, Tyler appeared in the doorway, his small frame silhouetted against the porch light. "Hey, buddy," Blake said, closing the laptop. "You're home early. Everything okay?" Tyler's face was pale, his usual animated demeanor replaced by something Blake had never seen before, a hollow, adult worry that didn't belong on a child's face. "Dad, Tyler's voice cracked. He clutched his overnight bag against his chest like a shield. Blake stood, his paternal instincts overriding his professional calm. "What's wrong?" "My friend said something to me." Tyler's eyes darted toward the living room. "He said I must never tell you what I saw." The air in the room seemed to thicken. Blake knelt to Tyler's eye level, his voice gentle but firm. "What friend? What did you see?" Tyler trembled, pointing toward the living room where family photos lined the mantelpiece. Pictures of birthdays, vacations, Christmas mornings. All the moments that made up their supposedly perfect life. "It's right there, Dad. In the picture from Uncle Mike's pool party last month." Blake followed Tyler's finger to a framed photo Diana had placed there just weeks ago. It showed the whole family at Mike's backyard barbecue. Diana in her red sundress, Blake grilling burgers, Tyler splashing in the pool. But Tyler was pointing at something specific in the background. Before Blake could examine it closer, the garage door rumbled open. Diana's BMW pulled into the driveway. Tyler flinched at the sound. "She's home." "Tyler, what exactly did your friend tell you?" He said. Tyler's voice dropped to a whisper. "He said grown-ups have secrets that can break families apart, and that some secrets are worth keeping even if they hurt." Diana's heels clicked across the kitchen floor. "Blake? Tyler? What are you doing home, sweetie?" Blake felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd interrogated enough people to recognize evasion, and Tyler was protecting someone. The question was who? Diana appeared in the doorway, her book club outfit immaculate, her smile bright and practiced. "Tyler, honey, why didn't you call for a ride?" "I wanted to walk," Tyler mumbled. Blake studied his wife's face, applying the same analytical skills he used on hostile witnesses. Her pupils were slightly dilated. Her breathing was elevated. Her left hand was fidgeting with her wedding ring, a tell he'd never noticed before, but now seemed blindingly obvious. "How was book club?" Blake asked, his tone casual. "Oh, you know how it is." Linda went on forever about some romance novel. "I left early." Diana's laugh sounded forced. "I'm exhausted. Think I'll take a bath and turn in early." She kissed Blake's cheek, her perfume carrying an unfamiliar scent underneath, something masculine and woodsy, something that reminded him of Mike's cologne. As Diana headed upstairs, Blake turned back to Tyler. "Show me what you saw in the picture." Tyler approached the photo hesitantly. His small finger pointed to the background, where Blake could now see something he'd missed before: a window into Mike's house, and two figures embracing inside. "Tyler," Blake said carefully, "when did you take this picture?" "I didn't. Mom did. She said she was getting a good shot of you cooking." Tyler's voice was barely audible, "But I think she was taking a picture of something else." Blake lifted the frame, studying the image more closely. In the window's reflection, he could make out Diana's distinctive red dress and a man's silhouette. A man who was definitely not Blake, because Blake was clearly visible at the grill in the foreground. "Dad," Tyler's voice was small, "are you and Mom going to get divorced?" Blake set the photo down, his hands steady despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. 20 years of marriage, 8 years of fatherhood, 6 years of friendship and professional partnership, all of it built on lies. "Go get ready for bed, buddy," Blake said, his voice surprisingly calm. "Everything's going to be okay." Tyler nodded and headed upstairs, leaving Blake alone with the photograph and the sound of running water from Diana's bath. Blake Morrison had spent his career protecting other people's secrets. Now he was about to uncover his own family's betrayals, and he had no intention of protecting anyone. Chapter 2. The investigation begins. Blake waited until Diana's breathing settled into the deep rhythm of sleep before slipping out of bed. It was 2:17 a.m., and years of military training had taught him to move silently through the house. He made his way to his home office, a converted bedroom that Diana rarely entered. From a locked drawer in his desk, Blake retrieved tools of his trade: digital recording devices, GPS trackers, and a laptop loaded with surveillance software that wasn't exactly legal for civilian use. But Blake had learned long ago that the line between legal and necessary was often drawn by people who'd never had their world imploded. He started with Diana's phone, which she'd left charging in the kitchen. Her passcode was Tyler's birthday, a detail that now felt like another small betrayal. Blake connected a data extraction device, downloading her text messages, call logs, and photos. What he found made his jaw clench. The messages went back 4 months. Pet names, meeting times, explicit photos. But it wasn't just an affair, it was a systematic deconstruction of everything Blake held sacred. "Mike, Blake suspects nothing. He actually thanked me for watching Tyler so much lately." "Diana, I feel terrible about using Tyler like this, but he loves his sleepovers with Uncle Mike." "Mike, the kid's a good cover. Blake would never question family time." "Diana, after the Henderson job wraps up, we should tell him. I can't keep living this lie." "Mike, let's wait until he's more settled. Maybe after his contract renewal." Blake's hands remained steady as he screenshotted everything, but inside, a cold fury was building. They weren't just betraying him. They were using his son as a prop in their deception. But the deeper Blake dug, the more disturbing the truth became. This wasn't a simple affair born of passion or midlife crisis. Diana and Mike had been systematically planning their future together, and that future didn't include Blake coming out unscathed. "Diana, the house is in both our names, but the security business is all his. We need to be careful about how we handle the split. Mike, I've been copying client files to my personal drive. If he tries to freeze me out, I'll have leverage." "Diana, you're talking about stealing for your best friend." "Mike, I'm talking about survival. Blake doesn't forgive betrayal. When he finds out, he'll try to destroy us both." Blake leaned back in his chair, a grim smile playing at his lips. Mike knew him well enough to be afraid. That was smart. Blake Morrison didn't just burn bridges. He salted the earth beneath them. He moved to Diana's laptop next, breaking her password in under 10 minutes. Her browser history revealed regular visits to divorce attorney websites, real estate listings, and private schools in other states. She'd been planning her exit strategy for months. But the most damning evidence came from her cloud storage. Videos, taken surreptitiously during Blake's business trips. Diana and Mike in Blake's bed, in his home office, even in Tyler's playroom after the boy was asleep. They hadn't just betrayed him. They'd desecrated every space he considered sacred. Blake copied everything to an encrypted drive, then returned Diana's devices to their original locations. As he climbed back into bed, Diana stirred beside him. "Everything okay?" she mumbled. "Just couldn't sleep," Blake replied, pulling her close. She settled against his chest, her wedding ring cold against his skin. Blake stared at the ceiling until dawn, planning. By the time Diana's alarm went off, he'd already decided on his course of action. Diana and Mike wanted to play games with his life. He'd show them what a real game looked like. Over breakfast, Blake was the picture of a devoted husband and father. He made Tyler's lunch, kissed Diana goodbye, and reminded her about the parent-teacher conference schedule for the following week. "I love you," Diana said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him. "I love you too," Blake replied, and meant it. That was what made their betrayal so unforgivable. After dropping Tyler at school, Blake drove to his office. Morrison Security occupied the top floor of a downtown office building, with bulletproof windows and military-grade security systems. Blake's employees were all former military or law enforcement, people who understood loyalty and discretion. His assistant, Carmen Rodriguez, had been with him for 5 years. She was a former DEA agent who'd left the agency after a shooting that ended her field career. Carmen was also one of the few people who knew Blake's real history, not just the sanitized version he told clients. "Morning, boss," Carmen said as Blake entered. "Mike called earlier. Wants to meet for lunch to discuss the Peterson contract." Blake paused at his office door. "Did he specify a location?" "Said he'd text you." Sounded eager to talk. Blake nodded and closed his office door. "Mike wanted to discuss business?" "Perfect." Blake had some business of his own to address. He spent the morning reviewing Mike's access to company systems, client files, and financial records. As a partner, Mike had extensive privileges that Blake began systematically revoking. By noon, Mike's access was limited to basic email and scheduling. Mike's text arrived at 12:15. "Lunch at Rosario's? 1 p.m. Need to discuss some opportunities." Blake responded, "See you there." Rosario's was an upscale Italian restaurant where Blake and Mike had celebrated numerous business successes. Today, it would mark the beginning of Mike's destruction. Blake arrived early, choosing a corner table with clear sight lines to all entrances. When Mike walked in, Blake studied his former friend with new eyes. Mike Torres was everything Blake wasn't. Charming where Blake was direct, smooth where Blake was intense. Women gravitated toward Mike's easy smile and quick wit, including, apparently, Blake's wife. "Blake." Mike's greeting was enthusiastic, his handshake firm. "Thanks for making time. I know you're swamped with the Henderson job." "Always have time for my partner," Blake replied, gesturing for Mike to sit. They ordered drinks, bourbon for Blake, wine for Mike. As they waited for their food, Mike launched into his pitch. "I've been thinking about expansion," Mike said. "Corporate consulting is booming, especially in cybersecurity. I've got a lead on a major contract with Meridian Industries." Blake sipped his bourbon, letting Mike talk. Meridian Industries was one of Blake's largest clients, a multinational corporation with executives who required constant protection. "The thing is," Mike continued, "they specifically requested someone from our team. Apparently, they've heard good things about our work." Blake set down his glass. "Which team member?" "Well, that's the interesting part. They want someone with field experience, but also someone who can blend in at corporate events. Someone like me." Blake almost laughed. Mike was pitching him on stealing his own client. "That's a conflict of interest," Blake said. "Meridian has an exclusive contract with Morrison Security." Mike's expression didn't change, but Blake caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "I was thinking more of a subcontract arrangement. Keep it in the family." "The family," Blake repeated slowly. "Interesting choice of words. You know what I mean? We're brothers, Blake. Everything I have, I owe to you." Blake leaned back in his chair. Everything. Absolutely. The business, the connections, the opportunities. Hell, even meeting Diana. If you hadn't introduced us at that company barbecue. Mike stopped mid-sentence, realizing his mistake. Blake's expression hadn't changed, but something in his eyes made Mike's blood run cold. Actually, Blake said quietly, I think we should discuss a different kind of partnership dissolution. Mike's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his wine glass. Blake, I don't know what you think you know. I know everything, Blake interrupted. The question is what you're going to do about it. The restaurant noise faded into background static as the two men stared at each other across the table. Mike Torres had just realized he was no longer dining with his friend and business partner. He was sitting across from his executioner. Chapter 3. Gathering Allies. Blake's calmness unnerved Mike more than shouting would have. After 30 seconds of silence, Mike attempted damage control. Blake, listen. No. Blake's voice carried the quiet authority that had made him successful in his military and civilian careers. You're going to listen. You're going to sit there, finish your lunch, and listen to exactly how this is going to work. Mike's face had gone pale, but he nodded. First, you're going to transfer your shares in Morrison Security to me for $1. The paperwork will be ready by end of business today. Second, you're going to return every client file, password, and piece of proprietary information you've stolen. Third, you're going to end whatever fantasy you and my wife have been playing. Blake, you don't understand. I understand that you used my son as a cover for your affair. I understand that you've been planning to steal my clients and my business. I understand that you've been recording videos in my home like some kind of perverted trophy hunter. Mike's face crumpled. She told you about the videos? Blake almost smiled. Diana didn't tell me anything. I found out myself. Which brings us to the interesting part of this conversation. Blake leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more menacing than a shout. You see, Mike, Diana thinks this is about love. She thinks you two are star-crossed lovers fighting against the constraints of society. But you and I both know the truth. This was never about her. This was about taking everything I've built. Mike started to protest, but Blake held up a hand. The affair was just the weapon. The real target was always my business, my reputation, my life. Diana was a means to an end, a way to get close enough to destroy me from the inside. Blake's psychological assessment was brutal in its accuracy. Mike had initially been attracted to Diana, but the relationship had evolved into something calculated and predatory. Blake's business success, his military reputation, his seemingly perfect life, it all represented everything Mike felt he deserved but had never earned. Here's what's going to happen, Blake continued. You're going to call Diana tonight and tell her the affair is over. You're going to explain that you were using her to get back at me for some imagined slight. You're going to break her heart so thoroughly that she'll hate you more than she could ever hate me. Mike's jaw dropped. You want me to lie to her? I want you to tell her the truth. Because we both know that's exactly what this was. Blake stood, throwing cash on the table. You have until 5 p.m. to deliver the signed transfer documents and return my property. After that, I stopped being reasonable. As Blake walked away, Mike called after him. And if I don't, Blake paused at the restaurant's entrance, turning back with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Then I'll remind you why they called me the Iceman in the service. And Mike, they didn't call me that because I was cool under pressure. Blake left Mike sitting alone at the table, his untouched food growing cold. Back at his office, Blake found Carmen waiting with a visitor, Detective Ray Kowalski from the city's Financial Crimes Unit. Blake had worked with Ray on several corporate investigation cases, and they developed a mutual respect based on shared military backgrounds. Ray, Blake said, shaking hands. What brings you by? Carmen said you might have some information relevant to an ongoing investigation. Blake raised an eyebrow at Carmen, who simply shrugged. I may have mentioned that you'd recently discovered some irregularities in business file access. Blake invited Ray into his office, closing the door behind them. What kind of investigation are we talking about? Blake asked. Corporate espionage. Someone's been selling client security assessments to competitors. We've tracked the sales back to a series of shell companies, but we can't identify the source. Blake felt a cold satisfaction settling over him. What kind of evidence would you need? Digital files showing unauthorized access, copies of stolen documents, financial records linking the thefts to personal accounts. Pretty standard stuff. Blake opened his laptop, pulling up Mike's access logs from the past 6 months. Hypothetically, if I had evidence of a business partner systematically copying client files and storing them on personal devices, would that interest you? Ray leaned forward. Very much. Blake turned the screen around, showing Mike's late-night access patterns, file download records, and email logs. And if I could prove those files were being sold to competitors through shell companies? I need to see the financial connections, but if you have that... Blake opened another window, displaying bank records he'd accessed through Mike's personal laptop the night before. Mike had been sloppy, using the same passwords for business and personal accounts. Jesus, Ray whispered. How long has this been going on? At least 8 months, maybe longer. Ray studied the evidence for several minutes before looking up at Blake. I have to ask, how did you discover this? Blake's expression was carefully neutral. I had reason to investigate potential security breaches within my organization. Ray nodded, understanding the subtext. Blake wasn't going to volunteer information about the affair, but he wasn't hiding the business crimes either. I'll need official copies of these files, and I'll need you to testify about your discovery of the thefts. Of course. When do you need them? How about this afternoon? I'd like to have an arrest warrant ready before close of business. Blake glanced at his watch. It was 2:30 p.m. Mike had 2.5 hours to comply with Blake's demands, but it no longer mattered. Blake had just ensured that Mike would be spending the foreseeable future dealing with federal criminal charges. After Ray left with the evidence files, Carmen knocked on Blake's door. There's something else you should know, she said. I've been monitoring your home security system like you asked. Diana left the house at 1:45 p.m. and drove to Mike's place. She's still there. Blake nodded. He'd expected as much. Mike would have called Diana immediately after lunch, probably spinning some version of events that made Blake look like the villain. Carmen, I need you to make some calls. I want divorce attorneys, financial advisors, and private investigators standing by. Also, contact our insurance company about bonding irregularities with business partners. Already done, Carmen said. And Blake? I'm sorry. Mike seemed like a good guy. Blake looked out his office window at the city below. The best betrayals always come from people who seem like good guys. That's what makes them so effective. At 4:30 p.m., Blake's phone buzzed with a text from Mike. I need more time. This is complicated. Blake responded immediately. No extensions. You had years to plan this. You get 30 more minutes. At 4:55 p.m., Detective Kowalski called Blake's direct line. We're moving on Torres now. Do you want to be present for the arrest? Blake considered the offer. Part of him wanted to see Mike's face when the handcuffs clicked into place. But he had bigger plans for the evening. No, thanks. I have other matters to attend to. Understood. We'll be in touch about testimony schedules. Blake hung up and gathered his things. It was time to go home and have a conversation with his wife. As he drove through the suburban streets toward his house, Blake reflected on the day's events. Mike was about to discover that betraying Blake Morrison came with consequences that extended far beyond hurt feelings and broken friendships. Diana was about to learn the same lesson. Blake Morrison had spent his career protecting other people from threats they couldn't see coming. Tonight, he was going to become the threat that his own family never saw coming. And unlike his enemies in the field, Diana and Mike had nowhere to run. Chapter 4. The Confrontation. Blake pulled into his driveway at 6:15 p.m., noting that Diana's BMW was already in the garage. Through the kitchen window, he could see her moving around, probably preparing dinner as if nothing had changed. Tyler met him at the door, his backpack slung over his shoulder and his face still carrying the worry from the night before. Dad, can we talk? Blake knelt to his son's level. What's on your mind, buddy? Is Uncle Mike in trouble? Blake felt his chest tighten. Tyler might be 8 years old, but he was perceptive enough to sense the tension crackling through their previously stable world. Why do you ask? Mom's been crying, and she keeps trying to call Uncle Mike, but he's not answering. Blake glanced toward the kitchen, where Diana was indeed moving with the jerky, distracted motions of someone fighting tears. Tyler, sometimes adults make mistakes that hurt other people. When that happens, there are consequences. Did Uncle Mike make a mistake? Blake chose his words carefully. Uncle Mike betrayed our family. That's not something I can forgive. Tyler nodded solemnly, accepting his father's judgment with the absolute trust that children place in their parents. It was a trust Blake intended to honor, even if it meant becoming the villain in his wife's story. Go do your homework, Blake said. I need to talk to Mom. Tyler headed upstairs, leaving Blake alone with the sound of Diana aggressively chopping vegetables in the kitchen. He loosened his tie and walked into what was about to become a battlefield. Diana looked up as he entered, her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. How was your lunch with Mike? Interesting, Blake replied, pouring himself a bourbon from the bottle they kept on the counter. How was your afternoon? Diana's knife paused mid-chop. I did some shopping. Ran errands. Funny thing about errands, Blake said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. They usually involve going to stores or businesses, not driving to your lover's house to plan damage control. The knife clattered to the cutting board. Diana's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, fear, anger, and finally resignation. How long have you known? Long enough to be disappointed in how predictable you've both been. Diana turned to face him fully, and Blake saw something in her expression that surprised him. Relief. I was going to tell you, she said. After Tyler's birthday party next month. We didn't want to disrupt. Don't. Blake's voice cut through her justification like a blade. Don't pretend this was about protecting our son. You used him as cover for your affair. You made him complicit in your betrayal. Diana's composure cracked. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Mike and I tried to fight it, but you decided your happiness was more important than your family's stability. I understand. What I don't understand is why you thought I'd let you walk away with half of everything I built. Diana straightened, her lawyer consultation research giving her confidence. This is a no-fault divorce state, Blake. The courts don't care about adultery when dividing assets. Blake smiled, and Diana took an involuntary step backward. You're right. The courts don't care about adultery, but they care very much about fraud, conspiracy, and theft. What are you talking about? Blake pulled out his phone, opening a video file. Diana's face appeared on the screen, clearly recognizable in Mike's bedroom. But what made her gasp wasn't her nudity. It was the timestamp showing the date she'd told Blake she was at her sister's funeral in Denver. You weren't the only one Mike was recording, Blake said quietly. He's been documenting everything. Every lie you told me. Every family event you missed for your secret meetings. Every time you chose your affair over your husband and son. Diana sank into a kitchen chair, her face pale. You're lying. Mike wouldn't. Mike is currently being arrested for corporate espionage and theft. The FBI found evidence that he's been selling client security assessments to competitors for months. Apparently, adultery wasn't enough excitement for him. He needed to add felony theft to the mix. Diana's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. But here's the really fascinating part, Blake continued. Mike's been keeping detailed records of everything. Financial accounts, meeting locations, even audio recordings of your conversations about leaving me. The FBI is very interested in his files. Blake wasn't lying about the arrest, but he was creatively interpreting the scope of Mike's documentation. Let Diana's imagination fill in the blanks. I want to see Tyler, Diana whispered. Tyler is upstairs doing homework. He's going to continue living in this house, attending his school, and maintaining his routine. The only question is whether you'll be part of that routine. Diana looked up sharply. You can't keep me from my son. I don't want to keep you from Tyler. But I also won't let you destroy his stability for the sake of your guilt. Blake sat across from Diana, his voice becoming businesslike. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to file for divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences. You're going to accept primary custody remaining with me, with reasonable visitation for you. You're going to sign a property settlement that gives you the BMW, your personal belongings, and enough money to start over somewhere else. That's not enough. I'm entitled to half. You're entitled to what I decide you're entitled to. Because if you force this into a contested divorce, I'll make sure every detail of your affair becomes public record. I'll make sure Tyler knows exactly why his family fell apart. I'll make sure your parents, your sister, Your book club friends, and everyone else in your social circle knows that you chose another man over your family. Diana's face hardened. You're threatening me. I'm explaining consequences. You made choices, Diana. Now you get to live with them. Blake finished his bourbon and stood. You have until Monday to decide. Accept my terms, or spend the next year watching me dismantle your life piece by piece in family court. As Blake walked toward the stairs, Diana called after him. What about Tyler? What are you going to tell him? Blake paused, his hand on the banister. I'm going to tell him the truth. That his mother chose to leave us for another man, but that it's not his fault, and he's going to be okay. Blake, please. Can we work this out? For Tyler's sake? Blake turned back to look at his wife, really look at her. For a moment, he saw the woman he'd fallen in love with 12 years ago. The woman who'd promised to stand by him through everything. The woman who'd held his hand when Tyler was born and whispered that they were going to be an amazing family. Then he remembered the videos, the lies, the way she'd used their son as cover for her betrayal. Diana, Blake said quietly, some things can't be fixed. This is one of them. Blake climbed the stairs, leaving Diana alone in the kitchen with the ruins of her marriage and the echo of choices that couldn't be undone. Behind Tyler's closed door, Blake could hear the soft sounds of his son working on homework. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. Blake intended to make sure Tyler's world stayed as normal and safe as possible, even if it meant becoming the kind of man who destroyed families to save them. Some prices were worth paying. Chapter 5. The Domino Effect. Monday morning brought news that exceeded even Blake's expectations. Carmen greeted him with coffee and a stack of newspapers, their headlines varying, but their message consistent. Local security executive arrested in corporate espionage ring. Mike made page 1, Carmen said, barely concealing her satisfaction. The reporter had access to some very detailed information about his methods. Blake scanned the article, noting quotes from anonymous law enforcement sources that painted Mike as a calculating criminal who betrayed trust for profit. The story mentioned his access to high-profile client information and suggested the investigation was expanding to include potential co-conspirators. Any word from Diana's attorney? Blake asked. She signed the papers Friday afternoon. Clean divorce, terms as discussed. She's moving to Phoenix to stay with her sister. Blake nodded. Diana had chosen pragmatism over pride, accepting his settlement rather than risk a public trial. It was the smart choice, though Blake suspected it was prompted more by Mike's arrest than by any desire for an amicable resolution. And Tyler. Dr. Martinez has cleared her schedule for this afternoon. She thinks family counseling sessions will help him process the changes. Blake had spent the weekend explaining the divorce to Tyler in age-appropriate terms. The boy had taken the news better than expected, though Blake suspected the full impact hadn't hit yet. There's one more thing, Carmen said, her tone shifting. We have a new client request. Meridian Industries wants to expand their security contract. Blake looked up from the newspaper. Meridian was Mike's target client, the company he'd planned to steal from Morrison Security. What kind of expansion? Full corporate protection services. They want background checks on all employees with access to sensitive information, comprehensive security assessments, and ongoing monitoring of potential threats. Blake smiled grimly. Mike's arrest had apparently made Meridian's executives nervous about their current security protocols. Set up a meeting for this afternoon, after my session with Tyler. Carmen handed him a file folder. There's also this, from Detective Kowalski. Inside were photographs and documents Blake hadn't seen before, evidence from Mike's house that painted an even darker picture of the conspiracy. Mike hadn't just been stealing client files. He'd been building dossiers on Blake's employees, tracking their personal vulnerabilities and financial pressures. One document made Blake's blood run cold. It was a psychological profile of Tyler, complete with notes about the boy's routines, fears, and attachment to Uncle Mike. The final paragraph suggested that Tyler could be used as leverage for cooperation if Blake discovered the theft operation. Blake set the document down carefully, his hands perfectly steady despite the rage building inside him. Carmen, I need you to run a complete security audit on Tyler's school, our house, and any place he regularly visits. I want to know if Mike planted any surveillance devices. Already in progress. We found 3 listening devices. One in Tyler's room, one in your home office, and one in the kitchen. Blake's jaw tightened. Mike had been recording his family's private conversations for months, gathering intelligence like they were enemy combatants. There's more, Carmen continued. Mike had been photographing Tyler at school events, soccer games, even just playing in your yard. We found over 200 photos on his personal computer. Blake stood abruptly, his chair rolling backward. Where is Mike being held? County lockup, pending federal transfer. Blake, what are you thinking? Blake was thinking about a conversation he'd had with Tyler over the weekend. His son had asked if Uncle Mike was ever going to visit again, and Blake had assured him that Mike was gone forever. But Tyler deserved to understand exactly why that was necessary. Schedule a meeting with the DA's office. I want to discuss additional charges. What kind of charges? Blake picked up the photos of his son. Stalking, child endangerment, conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Carmen's eyes widened. Blake, some of those might be hard to prove. Then we'll make them easier to prove. Blake spent the afternoon session with Dr. Martinez and Tyler, answering the boys' questions about the divorce and establishing new routines that didn't include Uncle Mike. Tyler was resilient, adapting to the changes with the flexibility that children possessed, but Blake could see the confusion in his eyes. Will I still get to have sleepovers? Tyler asked. With other friends, yes, but not with Uncle Mike. Because he made bad choices? Because he hurt our family, and I won't let anyone do that again. Tyler seemed to accept this explanation, though Dr. Martinez made notes about monitoring his emotional adjustment over the coming months. After the session, Blake drove to the Meridian Industries headquarters, a glass tower downtown that housed one of the city's largest corporations. The executive team was waiting in a conference room that overlooked the city. Mr. Morrison, said Patricia Webb, Meridian CEO, thank you for coming on short notice. Blake shook hands with the assembled executives, noting the tension in the room. We understand you've had some internal security issues, Webb continued. Former partner betrayed client confidentiality for financial gain, Blake said simply. The situation has been resolved. We'd like to ensure our information remains secure going forward. Blake opened his briefcase, removing a comprehensive security proposal he'd prepared that morning. Full employee background checks, biometric access controls, encrypted communications, and real-time monitoring of all data access, plus personal protection services for executive staff and their families. The financial terms were aggressive, triple what Meridian was currently paying for basic security consulting. But Blake knew they were scared, and scared clients paid premium prices for peace of mind. This seems extensive, said the CFO. Corporate espionage cost Meridian $12 million last quarter, Blake replied. My former partner sold your expansion plans to 3 different competitors. This level of security ensures that never happens again. The executives exchanged glances. Blake's research had been accurate. Meridian had indeed suffered significant losses from leaked information. What guarantees do we have that your current employees are trustworthy? Webb asked. Blake smiled. Every member of my team has been personally vetted by me. They're former military or law enforcement, with security clearances and proven loyalty records. More importantly, they understand that betraying Morrison Security means betraying me personally. Blake's reputation in the security industry was built on 2 things: competence and consequences. His employees knew that he rewarded loyalty generously and punished betrayal ruthlessly. And if something goes wrong, then I personally guarantee that the responsible party will face consequences that extend far beyond termination. Webb nodded slowly. We'll need to discuss this with our board, but I think we can move forward. Blake left Meridian with a 3-year contract worth $8 million, more than his entire previous annual revenue. Mike's betrayal had inadvertently positioned Morrison Security as the premier firm for companies worried about internal threats. That evening, Blake sat in his home office reviewing the day's developments. Diana was in Phoenix, probably starting her new life with whatever savings she'd managed to accumulate. Mike was in federal custody, facing charges that would likely result in a decade-long prison sentence. But Blake wasn't satisfied. Mike's surveillance of Tyler crossed lines that went beyond business betrayal or adultery. It suggested a level of predatory behavior that demanded a more personal response. Blake opened his laptop and began researching the federal prison system, looking for institutions where Mike would likely be housed. He had contacts throughout the correction system, former clients who owed him favors, security consultants who worked inside federal facilities. Mike Torres had made the mistake of threatening Blake's son. That wasn't a business matter or a legal issue. That was personal, and Blake Morrison handled personal matters very differently than he handled business disputes. Chapter 6. Inside Information. Blake's contact inside the federal system was a man named Vincent Torres, no relation to Mike, despite the shared surname. Vincent ran security operations at FCI Beaumont, a medium-security federal prison in Texas where white-collar criminals served their sentences alongside more violent offenders. Vincent owed Blake a significant debt. 3 years earlier, Blake had provided security for Vincent's daughter's wedding after credible threats from a drug cartel that Vincent had helped prosecute during his time as a federal prosecutor. Blake's team had neutralized the threat quietly and effectively, ensuring the wedding proceeded without incident. Now Blake was calling in that favor. Vincent, I need information about an incoming inmate. Mike Torres, arrested for corporate espionage. Let me check the system. Blake heard typing on the other end of the call. Yeah, he's scheduled for transfer here next month. Why the interest? Personal matter. This man targeted my family. Vincent's tone shifted. In their circles, threats to family were understood to require special handling. What kind of personal matter? Blake explained Mike's surveillance of Tyler, the photos, the psychological profiles. By the time he finished, Vincent was quiet for a long moment. Jesus, Blake. That's predatory behavior. The kind that doesn't play well in general population. I'm not asking you to do anything directly. I just want to ensure that the right people know about his particular interests. In federal prison, certain crimes carried social consequences that extended far beyond legal sentencing. Child endangerment, even peripherally, marked an inmate for particular attention from other prisoners. I understand. Word gets around, especially about guys who take pictures of kids. I appreciate your understanding. Blake, there's something else. Torres has been trying to make deals with federal prosecutors. Claims he has information about other security firms, other corporate espionage operations. Blake felt a cold satisfaction settle over him. Mike was exactly the type of person who would try to reduce his sentence by implicating others, regardless of whether his information was accurate. Any specifics? Nothing concrete yet, but he's mentioned your company specifically. Claims you had knowledge of his activities. Blake had expected this. Mike's desperation would lead him to construct elaborate fictions about Blake's involvement, hoping to trade false information for a reduced sentence. Vincent, I need you to understand something. Anything Mike Torres says about me or my business is fabricated. He's trying to create reasonable doubt about his own guilt by suggesting broader conspiracies. I figured as much, but you should know that the prosecutors are listening. Blake thanked Vincent and ended the call, then immediately contacted his attorney. If Mike was planning to implicate Blake in fictitious crimes, Blake needed to be prepared for additional federal scrutiny. But first, he had other business to handle. Blake drove to Tyler's school for the scheduled parent-teacher conference. Ms. Patterson, Tyler's third-grade teacher, was a kind woman in her 50s who'd been teaching long enough to recognize when children were processing difficult family changes. Tyler's been quieter than usual, she reported. He's not participating in group activities as much, and he seems distracted during lessons. We're going through a divorce, Blake explained. His mother moved out of state, and he's adjusting to a new routine. Ms. Patterson nodded sympathetically. Divorce is always hard on children. Have you considered counseling? We've started family therapy. Dr. Martinez thinks Tyler is processing the changes well, but it's going to take time. There is one other thing, Ms. Patterson said hesitantly. Tyler mentioned that his Uncle Mike used to take pictures of him at school events. He seemed confused about why Uncle Mike isn't around anymore. Blake's jaw tightened. Uncle Mike won't be around anymore. Ever. Ms. Patterson caught the finality in Blake's tone. I see. Well, if there are any safety concerns, There are no ongoing safety concerns. Uncle Mike is no longer in a position to be around children. Blake left the school with Tyler, who chattered about his day with forced cheerfulness. Blake recognized the behavior. Tyler was trying to be strong for his father, hiding his own confusion and sadness behind a brave facade. "Hey, buddy," Blake said as they drove home. "You know it's okay to be sad about Uncle Mike, right? Even when someone hurts our family, it's normal to miss them." Tyler was quiet for a moment. "I don't understand why he took pictures of me." Blake pulled into their driveway and turned to face his son. "Sometimes adults make very bad choices. Uncle Mike's choices hurt our family, and they could have hurt you too. That's why he can't be around us anymore." "Will he ever say he's sorry?" Blake considered lying, offering Tyler the hope of eventual redemption and reconciliation. But Mike Torres had crossed lines that Blake would never forgive, and Tyler deserved honesty. "No, buddy. Some mistakes are too big for sorry to fix." Tyler nodded solemnly, accepting his father's judgment with the absolute trust that children place in their parents. That evening, after Tyler was asleep, Blake received a call from Detective Kowalski. "Blake, we've got a problem. Torres is claiming you were involved in the corporate espionage operation." Blake sat down at his kitchen table, pouring himself a bourbon. "What specifically is he claiming?" "Says you knew about the file thefts and took a percentage of the profits. Claims he has evidence that you helped plan which clients to target." Blake laughed, a sound without humor. "Ray, think about that for a second. Why would I steal from my own clients? Why would I risk my business, my reputation, and my freedom for a few $1,000s in illegal profits?" That's what I told the federal prosecutor. But Torres is convincing, and he's offering details that suggest inside knowledge. Details he acquired through months of surveillance and theft. "Mike Torres knows my business operations because he was my partner and because he planted listening devices in my home and office." Blake had been expecting this development, but hearing it confirmed still triggered a cold anger. Mike wasn't content with destroying Blake's marriage and threatening his son. He was now trying to implicate Blake in federal crimes. "What do you need from me?" Blake asked. "Complete financial records, client communication logs, and any surveillance footage from your office that shows Torres accessing files without authorization. I'll have everything ready by tomorrow morning." After hanging up, Blake sat in his kitchen, sipping bourbon and considering his options. Mike's false accusations would be disproven easily enough. Blake's financial records were scrupulously clean, and the surveillance footage clearly showed Mike's unauthorized activities. But the accusations themselves represented a new level of betrayal. Mike wasn't just destroying his own life. He was actively trying to destroy Blake's. Blake finished his drink and headed to his home office. He had phone calls to make and plans to adjust. Mike Torres wanted to play games with federal prosecutors. Blake would show him what a real game looked like. By the time Mike realized the rules had changed, it would be far too late to forfeit. Chapter 7. Federal Scrutiny. The FBI arrived at Morrison Security at 7 a.m. on Thursday morning with a search warrant and a convoy of black SUVs that sent Blake's employees scrambling for their phones. Agent Sarah Chun, a sharp-eyed woman in her 30s, presented the warrant to Blake personally. "Mr. Morrison, we need to examine your financial records, client files, and computer systems in connection with an ongoing investigation." Blake examined the warrant carefully, noting its scope and limitations. "Agent Chun, my attorney will be here within the hour. Until then, my employees will cooperate fully, but I'll need to observe any examination of confidential client materials." Agent Chun nodded. Federal agents rarely enjoyed fishing expeditions, especially when the target was a former military officer with a clean record and powerful clients. "Mr. Morrison, we've received allegations that you participated in or had knowledge of corporate espionage activities conducted by your former partner, Michael Torres." "Agent Chun, those allegations are false, and I believe they're motivated by Mr. Torres's desire to reduce his own sentence by implicating innocent parties." Blake's attorney, David Kim, arrived precisely 1 hour later, carrying a briefcase and wearing the expression of a man who'd been interrupted during his morning coffee. "Blake, don't say another word." "Agent Chun, what exactly are you looking for?" Agent Chun handed Kim a copy of the warrant. evidence of conspiracy to commit corporate espionage, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Kim reviewed the warrant while Blake watched federal agents photograph his office, copy computer hard drives, and examine financial records. The investigation was thorough but professional. They weren't conducting a raid so much as building a comprehensive record. Agent Chun, Kim said after finishing his review, "My client is prepared to provide complete cooperation. However, some of these files contain classified information related to government contracts. We'll need to arrange secure viewing protocols." Blake had anticipated this moment. His business included contracts with defense contractors and government agencies, work that required security clearances and involved sensitive information. The FBI couldn't simply walk away with classified materials. "We'll need to schedule secure viewing at a federal facility," Agent Chin agreed. "Mr. Morrison, will you be available next week for additional questioning?" "Of course, but I think you'll find that Michael Torres's allegations don't match the evidence." Agent Chin's expression was neutral, but Blake caught the slight tightening around her eyes that suggested she was already reaching similar conclusions. Blake spent the afternoon rebuilding his office and reassuring clients that the federal investigation wouldn't affect their security arrangements. By evening, 3 major corporations had called to express continued confidence in Morrison security, and 2 new clients had inquired about services. Apparently, being investigated by the FBI was seen as a mark of thoroughness in the security industry. That evening, Blake received an unexpected call from Diana. "Blake, I saw the news about the FBI investigation. Are you all right?" Blake was surprised by the genuine concern in his ex-wife's voice. "I'm fine. Mike is trying to implicate me in his crimes to reduce his sentence. It won't work. I'm sorry. I know this must be difficult." Blake sat down, considering his response. Despite everything that had happened, Diana had been a significant part of his life for 12 years. "Diana, I need to ask you something. Did Mike ever mention involving me in his business schemes? Did he suggest that I knew about his activities?" Diana was quiet for a long moment. "Actually, yes. He said you were probably suspicious, but that you couldn't prove anything. He thought you might be planning to cut him out of the business." Blake felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Mike hadn't just been stealing from clients. He'd been building a narrative that would allow him to claim Blake was the real mastermind. "Did he ask you to say anything specific if you were ever questioned about our relationship?" "He wanted me to tell investigators that you were controlling and paranoid about the business, that you monitored everyone's activities and required reports on client interactions." Blake almost laughed. Mike had been trying to use Diana's testimony to support a conspiracy theory that painted Blake as the criminal mastermind. "Diana, I need you to tell the truth to any federal investigators who contact you. Just the truth, without any spin or interpretation that Mike suggested." "Of course. Blake, I want you to know that despite everything that happened between us, I never believed you were involved in Mike's crimes." Blake felt a strange mix of anger and gratitude toward his ex-wife. She betrayed their marriage, but she wasn't participating in Mike's attempt to destroy Blake's freedom. "Thank you. That means more than you might realize." After ending the call, Blake reviewed the day's events. The FBI investigation was proceeding exactly as he'd expected. Federal agents were finding evidence that supported Blake's innocence and contradicted Mike's allegations. But Blake wasn't content to simply wait for the investigation to clear his name. Mike had forced this confrontation by involving federal prosecutors in his revenge fantasy. Now Blake was going to finish it. Blake spent the evening researching Mike's legal representation. Mike's attorney was a public defender named Robert Martinez, an overworked lawyer handling dozens of federal cases simultaneously. Martinez was competent but stretched thin, unlikely to provide the kind of aggressive defense that might help Mike avoid a lengthy prison sentence. Blake called a contact in the legal community, a defense attorney named Patricia Vance who specialized in white-collar crimes. "Patricia, I need information about a case. Michael Torres, charged with corporate espionage." "Blake, I can't discuss ongoing cases with civilians. I'm not asking for privileged information. I need to understand the strength of the prosecutor's case and whether Torres is likely to accept a plea bargain." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Blake had referred several clients to her over the years, generating significant business for her practice. Off the record, the case is solid. Multiple felony counts, clear evidence, and no viable defense strategy. Torres is looking at 15 to 20 years unless he can provide substantial cooperation. What kind of cooperation would reduce his sentence? Information leading to additional prosecutions. Evidence of broader criminal conspiracies. Testimony against co-conspirators. Blake thanked Patricia and ended the call. Mike's accusations against Blake were motivated by desperate hope rather than actual evidence. The federal prosecutor would eventually realize that Mike's claims were fabricated, but not before Blake's reputation suffered additional damage. Blake decided it was time to accelerate Mike's legal timeline. Blake had contacts throughout the federal law enforcement community, relationships built over years of providing security services to government agencies. One of those contacts was Assistant U.S. Attorney Jessica Wong, who'd worked with Blake on several cases involving corporate espionage. Jessica, I understand you're handling the Torres prosecution. Blake, you know I can't discuss active cases with potential witnesses. I'm not asking about the case. I'm offering additional evidence that might interest you. Blake had spent the afternoon reviewing Mike's electronic communications, particularly his attempts to contact other security firms about business opportunities. What Blake found suggested that Mike's criminal activities extended beyond Morrison Security. What kind of evidence? Communications indicating that Torres attempted to recruit accomplices at other firms. Financial records showing payments from shell companies linked to competitors. Evidence that his criminal activities were more extensive than originally believed. Blake was offering Jessica the opportunity to expand her prosecution beyond a single defendant, transforming a straightforward corporate espionage case into a broader investigation of industry-wide criminal activity. I need to review the evidence before making any commitments. I'll have everything ready by Monday morning. Blake hung up, satisfied with the day's progress. By offering additional evidence against Mike, Blake was ensuring that federal prosecutors would have less interest in pursuing Mike's unsubstantiated allegations against Blake. More importantly, Blake was guaranteeing that Mike's sentence would be significantly longer than originally anticipated. Mike Torres had chosen to make Blake's life difficult with false accusations and desperate lies. Blake was about to make Mike's life very difficult indeed. Chapter 8. The Unraveling. Blake's additional evidence against Mike proved devastating. The communications Blake provided to Assistant U.S. Attorney Jessica Wong revealed a network of corporate espionage that extended to 3 other security firms and involved over 24 client companies. Within a week of Blake's meeting with prosecutors, the FBI had arrested 4 additional suspects and seized millions of dollars in assets. Mike Torres, originally facing 15 years for corporate espionage, was now looking at federal racketeering charges that carried a potential life sentence. Blake watched the expanded arrest from his office, feeling a grim satisfaction as news reports detailed the scope of the criminal conspiracy. Mike's attempt to implicate Blake had backfired spectacularly, positioning Blake as a whistleblower whose cooperation had exposed a major criminal network. Carmen knocked on Blake's office door, carrying a fresh cup of coffee and a smile that didn't quite hide her concern. The FBI called. Agent Chun wants to meet with you this afternoon for a final interview. Blake nodded. The federal investigation into his alleged involvement had been quietly closed after prosecutors realized that Mike's accusations were fabricated. Today's meeting was likely a formality designed to officially clear Blake's name. Also, Carmen continued, Tyler's school called. He got into a fight during recess. Blake looked up sharply. Tyler had never been aggressive, preferring books and quiet games to physical confrontation. What happened? Another boy said something about his mom leaving. Tyler punched him. Blake sighed, rubbing his temples. He'd been so focused on destroying Mike and protecting his business that he'd underestimated the emotional toll on his son. I'll pick him up after my meeting with Agent Chun. Blake spent the afternoon providing a final statement to federal investigators, officially confirming Mike's guilt and his own innocence. Agent Chun was professional, but clearly annoyed that she'd spent weeks investigating baseless allegations. Mr. Morrison, Michael Torres has admitted that his claims against you were fabricated. He was hoping to create reasonable doubt about his own guilt by suggesting broader conspiracies. Blake nodded. Agent Shun, I appreciate the thoroughness of your investigation. I understand that you had to follow up on his allegations. For what it's worth, we never found any evidence supporting Torres's claims. Your financial records are clean, your business practices are legitimate, and your cooperation has been exemplary. Agent Shun closed her file folder. This investigation is officially closed. I don't anticipate any further contact from our office. Blake shook Agent Shun's hand, then drove to Tyler's school. He found his son sitting in the principal's office, his knuckles scraped and his face set in an expression Blake recognized, the stubborn defiance of someone who knew they'd done wrong but wasn't sorry. Tyler, Blake said, sitting in the chair next to his son. Want to tell me what happened? Jeremy said Mom left because she didn't love us anymore. He said divorced kids always have moms who run away. Blake felt his chest tighten. Tyler was carrying emotional wounds that Blake's focus on revenge had left unaddressed. So you hit him? I told him to take it back. When he wouldn't, I made him. Blake almost smiled despite the situation. Tyler was definitely his son. Direct action in response to unacceptable behavior. Tyler, Jeremy was wrong about your mom. She left because she made bad choices, not because she doesn't love you. But hitting people doesn't solve problems. It stopped Jeremy from saying mean things. This time, but next time, Jeremy might hit back. Or he might tell everyone that Tyler Morrison solves problems with his fists instead of his brain. Tyler considered this, his 8-year-old mind processing the implications. What should I have done? Told Jeremy that he doesn't know anything about our family. Walked away. Found a teacher if he kept bothering you. Tyler nodded slowly. I'm sorry I hit him. I'm proud that you defended our family. I'm less proud of how you did it. Blake talked with Tyler's teacher and principal, establishing consequences that focused on better conflict resolution rather than punishment. Tyler would apologize to Jeremy and spend a week helping in the school library during recess. As they drove home, Tyler was quiet until they reached their driveway. Dad, are you sad that Mom left? Blake considered his answer carefully. I'm sad that our family changed, but I'm not sad that it's just you and me now. Are you going to find a new mom for me? Blake pulled into the garage, turning to look at his son. Tyler, I'm not looking for anyone right now. We're doing fine on our own. Jeremy said divorced dads always get new wives who are mean to kids. Blake unbuckled his seatbelt, studying Tyler's worried expression. Jeremy seems to have a lot of opinions about things he doesn't understand. I'm not Jeremy's dad, and Jeremy isn't you. That evening, Blake made Tyler's favorite dinner and helped with homework, trying to restore some normalcy to their routine. But he could see the questions in Tyler's eyes, the uncertainty about their future that Blake's focus on revenge had created. Blake's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Kowalski. Torres pled guilty to all charges. Sentence hearing next month. Thought you'd want to know. Blake set his phone aside without responding. Mike's legal consequences were no longer important compared to Tyler's emotional well-being. But Blake's satisfaction was interrupted by another phone call, this one from his attorney David Kim. Blake, we need to talk. There's been a development in the Torres case. What kind of development? Torres is claiming that his guilty plea was coerced. He's filed a motion to withdraw the plea, and he's requesting a new attorney. Blake felt a familiar cold anger settling over him. Even facing decades in prison, Mike was still trying to create problems for Blake. What's his basis for claiming coercion? He says federal investigators pressured him to accept responsibility for crimes he didn't commit. He's claiming that additional evidence was fabricated to strengthen the case against him. Blake almost laughed. Mike was accusing the FBI of the same tactics Mike had tried to use against Blake. David, is there any chance his motion will be successful? Unlikely. He's already admitted guilt in open court, and the evidence against him is overwhelming. But it might delay his sentencing and create additional media attention. Blake thanked David and hung up, then looked through the kitchen doorway at Tyler, who was reading quietly in the living room. Mike Torres was still trying to damage Blake's life, even from federal custody. But Blake was done playing defensive games. It was time to remind Mike that some people should never be threatened. Blake had tolerated Mike's false accusations and legal maneuvering because he'd assumed Mike would eventually accept defeat and serve his sentence quietly. Apparently, Blake had overestimated Mike's intelligence. Now Blake was going to finish this permanently. Chapter 9. Final Justice. Blake's patience with Mike Torres ended the moment he learned about the motion to withdraw the guilty plea. That night, after Tyler was asleep, Blake made a series of phone calls that would ensure Mike never threatened his family again. The first call was to Vincent Torres at FCI Beaumont. "Vincent, I need to accelerate our previous conversation about Mike Torres. He's attempting to create additional legal problems for my family. Understand. What timeline are we discussing? Torres will be transferred to your facility within 2 weeks. I need the population to understand his particular interests before he arrives. In federal prison, advance information about incoming inmates was crucial for maintaining order. Child predators, snitches, and certain white-collar criminals required special handling to prevent violence. Consider it handled," Vincent said. "Word gets around, especially about guys who take inappropriate photos of children." Blake's second call was to Patricia Vance, the defense attorney who'd provided information about Mike's case. "Patricia, I need a favor. Mike Torres is requesting new legal representation. I'd like you to consider taking his case." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Blake, that seems like a conflict of interest given your involvement in his prosecution. Actually, it would ensure he receives competent representation while also guaranteeing that his legal strategy focuses on legitimate defense rather than false accusations against innocent parties." Blake was offering to pay Patricia's fees to represent Mike, ensuring that Mike received excellent legal counsel that would discourage frivolous motions and desperate gambits. "I see. And you think this would benefit him how?" "Patricia, Mike Torres is looking at 40 years in federal prison. His current strategy of making false accusations and filing baseless motions is only making his situation worse. You could provide him with realistic advice about accepting responsibility and focusing on sentence mitigation." Patricia agreed to consider the arrangement, which would provide Mike with better representation while ensuring his legal strategy remained focused on legitimate issues rather than revenge fantasies. Blake's third call was to Assistant U.S. Attorney Jessica Wong. "Jessica, I understand Torres is trying to withdraw his guilty plea. Blake, I can't discuss plea negotiations. I'm not asking about negotiations. I'm offering additional cooperation. If Torres wants to claim his confession was coerced, I'm prepared to testify about the voluntary nature of his admissions and the accuracy of the evidence against him." Blake was volunteering to strengthen the prosecution's case against Mike's withdrawal motion, ensuring that Mike's guilty plea would stand regardless of his current legal maneuvering. Blake's final call was to Diana in Phoenix. "Diana, I need you to understand something. Mike is still trying to cause problems for our family from prison. If federal investigators contact you again, I need you to tell them exactly what Mike said about implicating innocent people." "Blake, what's happening?" Blake explained Mike's motion to withdraw his guilty plea and his continued attempts to create legal problems for Blake. "Diana, Mike used you to hurt our family, and now he's trying to use false accusations to escape responsibility for his crimes. I need you to help ensure that doesn't happen." Diana agreed to provide complete cooperation with federal prosecutors, including testimony about Mike's plans to falsely implicate Blake in criminal activity. With these arrangements in place, Blake felt confident that Mike's legal options were effectively eliminated. Patricia Vance would provide excellent defense counsel while discouraging frivolous motions. Jessica Wong would have additional evidence to defeat Mike's withdrawal attempt. Vincent Torres would ensure that Mike's prison experience reflected the seriousness of his crimes. But Blake wasn't finished. The following week, Blake received a call from Tyler's school. Ms. Patterson had news that surprised him. "Mr. Morrison, Tyler wrote a story for his creative writing assignment that I think you should read." Blake reviewed Tyler's story, which described a brave knight who protected his kingdom from a dragon that had infiltrated the royal court by pretending to be a friend. The knight discovered the dragon's true nature and banished it forever, ensuring the kingdom's safety. "Tyler's processing the changes in your family through his writing," Ms. Patterson explained. "He understands that someone he trusted betrayed that trust, and he's working through his feelings about it. Blake felt a surge of pride in his son's resilience and emotional intelligence. Tyler was healing from the disruption to his world, but he was also learning important lessons about trust, betrayal, and consequences. That evening, Blake found Tyler reading in his room. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always. In my story, the knight banished the dragon forever. But what if the dragon tries to come back?" Blake sat on Tyler's bed, choosing his words carefully. "Tyler, some people make such bad choices that they lose the right to be part of our lives. When that happens, we don't let them come back. We protect ourselves and the people we love. Like how you protected us from Uncle Mike." "Exactly like that." Tyler nodded thoughtfully. "I'm glad you're a good knight, Dad." Blake hugged his son, feeling a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge or justice. Tyler was safe, their life was stable, and the future looked bright. 3 weeks later, Blake received final confirmation that Mike's legal challenges had failed. His motion to withdraw the guilty plea was denied. His request for a new trial was rejected, and his sentencing was scheduled for the following month. Patricia Vance called Blake with the details. Mike received 35 years without possibility of parole. The judge specifically cited his attempts to blame innocent parties for his own crimes as evidence of his continued criminal mindset. Blake felt no satisfaction in Mike's lengthy sentence, only relief that the threat to his family was permanently resolved. "Patricia, thank you for providing him with competent representation. Blake, you should know that Mike asked me to give you a message. He said to tell you that he understands now why they called you the Iceman." Blake smiled grimly. Mike had finally realized that Blake Morrison didn't just defeat his enemies. He dismantled them completely. 6 months later, Blake stood in his backyard watching Tyler play soccer with friends from school. Their life had settled into a comfortable routine without Diana or Mike, and Tyler was thriving in his new environment. Carmen approached from the house, carrying a beer and wearing a rare smile. "Good news," she said. "Meridian Industries just recommended us to their parent company. We're looking at a $50 million contract." Blake accepted the beer, savoring the cold liquid and the warm afternoon sun. "Carmen, do you ever miss the old days? When it was just me, you, and Mike running a small security firm?" Carmen considered the question seriously. "Blake, I miss the simplicity, but I don't miss trusting people who didn't deserve it." Blake nodded, watching Tyler score a goal and celebrate with his friends. His son was happy, his business was thriving, and the threats to his family had been permanently eliminated. Some people might call Blake's response to betrayal excessive or ruthless. Blake preferred to think of it as thorough. Diana and Mike had learned that betraying Blake Morrison came with